So good morning. We'll start again. Start now. Now, last week we were discussing about corporate governance. I think we came up to slide number 16. Am I right? Can somebody confirm? We discussed about the audit contribution to governance and completed that part, right? Can somebody check your notes and confirm, please?
So I think slide number 14.
14, is it? All right. Okay. 14 we did,
Yes,
is
sir,
it?
it's 14. 14 we have finished.
We finished. Okay. Right. Right. Just to give a recap until somebody others join. How many have joined now? About 25?
30.
30. Okay. So just run through. Now we discuss when we started the corporate governance, we discussed and understood the objectives of the corporate governance, and then we came across the definition of corporate governance, and we took the OECD definition that said it's a set of relationships among the stakeholders. So we analyzed and we understood the obligations and the rights. Then we understood how this definition is applied into our practical life, and you understood the concept of this definition and why that definition has been made. Then we went on to say, different the bank set of objectives, then how the risk tolerance and the risk appetite takes into consideration when doing compliance. Then we looked at how the bank's business is run on a day-to-day basis and how the compliance can contribute towards it. Then also we discussed about our obligation towards the protection of the customer deposits against the moral hazard issues and various other the risk that prevails in connection. Then we discuss about aligning of the corporate activities to in a compliant manner so that the business will run on a kind of a safe and sound basis. Then we discuss about the different types of corporate governance. Then we discuss about the boards, unitary and dual. Then we understood what is our in Sri Lanka, what's the type of boards that we have, and in Europe and Germany and all that, what's the type of boards they have. Then we little touched on the Sharia supervisory, not into detail, but then in terms of Sharia as a kind of a concept where certain the compliance activities need to be monitored. Then we discuss about the management structures, the metric structures, then the silo structures. Then we went on to discuss about the how to maintain the independence of compliance. Then we went deep into that. Then we looked at the audit function and the audit contribution to governance. Then we discussed in detail, and then we have come up to the slide number 14, where we said board and the senior management will be responsible for the preparation of fair presentation of financial statements in accordance with the applicable accounting standard. Then also can contribute to effectiveness of the external auditors in order to ensure the bank's financial statements fairly represent and the true financial position and performance is depicted in the whatever the accounts that we are going to disclose. So any questions you have up to this point? It's the time to clarify. Are you all clear on the way that we are going forward, or do you want any changes done? Are you happy with the pace of the lecture? Is
Yes,
it too slow or is it too fast? Or does it suit your requirements? Now we have had about 5 lectures. Are you all comfortable with it? Do you get what I'm saying? Yes, please. Can some few answer at least? This is a very difficult task to do this lecture without seeing the audience. I always prefer to talk to the audience in front of me, then I can see their facial expressions and I know how to what extent have they grasped. But in this, with pluses and minuses are there in this online system, right? It's easy for you to log in from your home. There are lots of conveniences as well as lots of inherent uh, challenges that we are meeting in doing this, but it's the new normal, it's the order of the day, so you have to do it. So in that sense, I just want to get a feedback from you all, how you receive it. Are you receiving it properly, or do you have any doubt? Do you have any clarifications? So it's the time. Finally, you all should be the beneficiaries in this process. Can I get a feedback from you, please? Do you all make notes, the additional points that I am discussing? There are lots of things we discuss out of the, going beyond the study note given. Do you all make notes of that?
Yes, sir, we do make notes, and I'm of course comfortable the way it is conducted. Thank you.
Yeah. May I know your name, please?
I'm Randilu, sir.
Randilu. Thank you, Randilu. Any comment from others? Others have no comments.
Everything is loud and clear, sir, and I'm really grateful for the way you are conducting this lecture. Actually, crystal clear. Thank you very much, sir. I'm really grateful.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment. What's your name, please?
I'm Johan Silva, sir.
Thanks, Johan. Any others? No, actually, main thing what I want to know is whether you all are receiving this properly. Otherwise, my efforts and your efforts all will go down the drain, right? Because I'm moving out of the slide given in order to give you more kind of practical flavors. So then it needs to be well understood and well connected to the point we are talking. Sometimes when I take one point, I elaborate and I go on explaining the practical side of it. Because for me, what's more important is the practical side. And if you make your notes, I think definitely you are through. But if you don't make your notes connecting to that slide or the point on which that we are talking, then of course sometimes you might not be able to connect these things. That's my little worry that I have. So if you can make your notes on the spot then and there, and when you read it, probably by listening to the lecture again, then you will understand it very clear. That's my understanding. And I don't know whether to what extent I'm successful, but I just got two feedback from two Randilu and Johan. As per that, I'm okay. But rest of the participants or the students, if you have any doubts, you can always disturb me when I'm doing the lecture. Just on your mic and get your clarification done then and there, then it will be very, very easy, right? Or else you can even ask the questions later, but having it sorted on the spot is the most effective and a viable way to do, right? So we will move on to slide number 15. Audit contribution to governance. The non-executive board members should have the right to meet regularly in the absence of senior management with the external auditor and the heads of the internal audit and the compliance function. Now, this is a very important point, students, because the board is sitting on top, and they are the people who set the policy, who set the tone, who basically sanction the strategies of the bank. So they give the guidelines, the macro level guidelines as to how the business needs to be continued by the management, the senior management led by the corporate management and the managing director. So in this process, now our topic, this moment we are talking about the audit contribution to governance, right? So what this point says is the non-executive board members, right? But it is, when you say non-executive board members, exclusions are the members who are working in the board members who are working in the bank or who are working in the finance company day to day, like the managing director. So that is why the non-executives are taken into consideration here, because the executives are part of the management also. Now you need to understand why it's only the non-executive. That is the simple reason is, when it's executive, they are becoming part of the management. So here it is the non-executives who will sit and they will have an opportunity to talk to the auditors independently in the absence of the manager, in the absence of the corporate management, even in the absence of the managing director. So they are, why these are the good principles. The auditors can spell out their concerns directly to the board without, talking it in front of even the sensitive matters can be very easily conveyed. So that's a one important point in this good governance and the corporate governance. So in practice, every year, now you have the financial audits done. So every quarterly, you have to publish the results. So at least on a quarterly basis, you get the auditors to come and talk and then present their views and the observations and the risks that they have identified. So in addition to their reports that they issue, the report of the external auditor, we call it the management letter. Learn this word, ML. In practical terms, we always call it ML. You don't call it audit report. It's an audit report, but the technical jargon is ML, management letter. So they issue their report by issuing a management letter. And before they issue the management letter, every quarter, once they finalize their quarterly audit, they are summoned before the BIRMC and mostly the BAC, Board Audit Committee, and they need to come and tell their findings, give the board different things. So that meeting is held in the presence of all the directors taking part in the Board Audit Committee, plus the management will also sit there. The corporate management who are involved in it. The chief internal auditor will obviously sit there. The chief compliance officer will sit there. The chief risk officer will sit there. Then the MD CEO will sit there. And the CRO, the CCO, chief chief operating officer will sit there. The top people. And also, if there are any concerns with regard to the network, the head of network will also sit there. And they will spell out their concerns to the board. And after finishing that, they will, the practice is all the executives will move out, including the managing director. So it will be a confidential one-to-one meeting between the auditors and the non-executive directors. So any issues that they have will be conveyed to them. So that's what this says. The non-executive board members should have the right to meet regularly in the absence of senior management with the external auditor and the heads of the internal audit and compliance function. Right. So this is part of good governance. So you need to understand this, right? So this can facilitate board to oversee senior management implementation of the board policies and to ensure that the bank's business strategies and the risk exposures are consistent with the parameters established by the board. So as I explained, so this will facilitate for the, the oversee, for the board to oversee the senior management to what extent they have implemented the policies approved by the board, how the business is run, and what are the risk exposures. All that will be known to them, including the sensitive points and the matters will be conveyed to them, so they will have an opportunity to listen to all that. That independent meeting with the board audit committee. Now, the senior management should promote strong internal control to avoid activities and the practices that undermine their effectiveness. For example, senior management should ensure that there is effective segregation of duties where conflict could arise. It should also exercise effective control over employees in key business positions. So what does this say? Senior management should promote strong internal controls. Now, the soundness of the business will heavily dependent on the internal controls. And if you remember right, we mentioned about the a function called ICOFR, Internal Controls on Financial Reporting. Before every year end, before the final accounts are released to the public or publicized, you have to give a report. The internal auditor will do that report and submit it to the board, saying that the internal controls that relate to the financial reporting are in good sense, is working properly. The controls are effective enough, and the implementation of those controls are good. If they have any concern, that will be brought to the notice of the board, because the board need to know, because they are going to take responsibility for the account that are going to be published. Board will be finally responsible, right? Because it's under their supervision. So they need to be given this control. Therefore, the internal controls are extremely important. So you have to have the internal controls well checked and balanced. Now, the compliance function. Now we are talking about the audit function. The audit will look into this. Audit will look at the controls, whether there are any deviations from the laid down procedures. At the same time, I think I mentioned to you, they will look at whether the controls are effective enough, right? Now, the compliance function is also somewhat similar there, because they will do it continuously. Now, how the compliance does that is, compliance, gets involved from the time the guideline or a directive is issued by the regulator. Then you will see whether the direction, once it is issued, whether there's a gap in the bank, in your financial institution, in meeting that. If there's a gap, then they need to bridge the gap by either setting the policies or by bringing the procedures to meet those policy requirements, right? And also they will see whether the internal controls are good enough. So it's a collective effort. The compliance has a role to play, the audit has a role to play. Now, in this particular section, we are talking about the audit contribution. So the audit contribution is not the only contribution that ensures the good governance, that ensures that the controls are happening. It is just one part of it. The compliance has a major role to play, audit has a major role to play, and also the risk division also has a major role to play. These are the three lines of defenses that we discussed. So you'll have to have this, the big picture in your mind especially when you get back to your workstations and carrying out your compliance function. For example, senior management should ensure that there's effective segregation of duties where conflicts could arise. Now, segregation of duties is very important concept under governance. And it's every operation, I think there are segregation of duties. You go down to the lowest level. We have a concept called the dual control. I think all the bankers will know dual control. Even if you take the cash in the vault, there's a dual control. There are keys, A key, A and the B, the keys handled by the A class and the B class, or you call it the first set or the second set of keys. So there's a segregation. One person cannot be responsible, or one person cannot hold the entire cash of the bank. It is held under dual control. Two key holders are there, two signatures need to come in. You take any important function, you will have a dual control. Now, the good old days, the cashiers don't pay. Then the cashiers can pay, and there's a dual control by the officer sanctioning it. Now, of course, with this new involvements and all, certain cashiers are given certain limits to pay, right? then the dual control is somewhat compromised in those instances, but then that's the risk appetite. Now, all these are connected. That is given taking the competition in the world today, the competition in the market today, right? But then before that, those cashiers are given the due training, and that is why they are put as senior cashiers, right? Then firstly, they are authorized to take cash and approve the deposit. Those days, even the approval of the deposit has to be done by the office. I'm just saying how things have evolved in the industry of banking. But the point we are trying to drive here is the dual control concept, segregation of duties. Now you take the passwords. The passwords, granting of the passwords are done by an independent party, not by IT. Password administration is ideally done in the HR department, because the simple reason is if you give the passwords to IT or the system implementation group, SIG or BSD, business system developers, the support people, you need to take it out. That's very important control, where the segregation concept comes in. Otherwise, they can create their own password, they can create their own super user accounts, and they can do anything and everything in the system, right? So therefore, this segregation of duties is very important, and that is one function, that ensures that the frauds are eliminated, the frauds are avoided. So you have to, the compliance needs to keep a tab on it. The risk has to keep a tab on it. The audit has to keep a tab on this. So I will explain in, when things come up, how the risk is involved in this, right? So here it's only talking about the importance of segregation of duty. So it should also exercise effective control over employees in key business positions. So it should exercise effective control over the employees in the key business position. What does that mean? There are people who are having super passwords in the company, in the bank. They can, that we, in practical sense, we have systems called the privilege access management system. Those are the controls. Those are certain software support that we are taking in order to make sure that these people with the super passwords or the higher level passwords are doing only the right thing. So that's why they say the audit should exercise effective control over employees in key business positions. That needs to be checked by audit. So audit has to have a control. How the audit does that is by deploying one way of doing that is in addition to them. I mean, they can have various audit tools. You can have the CAM, key audit matters. They will have CACM. Various audit tools are there where they will go and check the functions of the people who are doing. Are they doing the right function? Are they overstepping? Are they doing ultra-virus things? All that they will have to check. Likewise, the super password users, those who are having super passwords are closely monitored by internal audit by having software and systems called the PAM, Privilege Access Management System. So that's important. Otherwise, the people with these higher passwords can, get involved in maybe various undesired activity. So everything needs to be checked. So that's basically the important thing that we are going to take from this. So now we have covered very widely and deeply how the internal audit function or the audit function can help and contribute towards good governance, right? Now, what does due diligence mean? Due diligence is a way of preventing unnecessary harm to either party involved in a transaction. Generally, due diligence refers to the care a reasonable person should take before entering into an agreement or a transaction with another party. For example, a due diligence investigation with regard to hedge funds refers to an in-detail review of hedge funds activity conducted in order to ensure that the funds is in compliance with this prospect, right? So what it tells is now we are learning the good governance. It is not only referred to banks. Good governance means these principles are mainly focused on the banks and the financial institution and the investment institution, right? So good due diligence generally is a way of preventing unnecessary harm to either party involved in a transaction. So you take a transaction, there are two parties. So both parties' interests are being looked at through this due diligence. So as a customer has a certain responsibility to make sure that his interest is safeguarded. The bank, mostly the bank has more kind of obligation in order to safeguard the customer's interest. So this due diligence comes into play in everything that we do, but it is more significantly seen in dealing with very sophisticated financial instruments like hedging, right? Even the forward exchange, swaps, things like that are very sophisticated. Mostly the hedging is a sophisticated kind of a financial instrument that is available in the market, right? So then it is a clear requirement that both parties need to be aware of the transaction in full. What are the consequences of entering into this? Now, if you remember, right, there was some time back, there were certain cases going on as against certain hedging issues, right? To hedge certain funds. Now, example, when you are importing, right? When you are importing, if you see that the prices are going up and continuously moving upwardly, you can come into some kind of an agreement with your supplier saying, okay, no matter whether the price goes up or come down, we are going to enter into a contract where you are going to supply us this item at this price. Now, some time back, I think you remember there were some issues with the hedging against the oil supply, purchase of oil, right? That time the prices were going up. When the prices went up, they entered into a hedging arrangement through banks to buy the crude oil at a particular price, right? Suppose if they had the price that was there may have been, say, $80 or whatever it is, right? And if it's going and if you are speculating the price to go up to high levels, you can enter into a hedging arrangement and say, okay, we are going to buy the price oil at $90. It may be a loss at this moment, but if you are speculating and if you have done your homework and the predictions effectively, you know that you are going to buy fuel for the next couple of continuously, and the trend is that the price is to go up. So probably you might go and hedge it at 90, right? In case even if the price comes down to 60, still you have to pay 90. So those are things where you have to do with lots of technical expertise available in the hands or the minds of the people who are involved in it, right? So that's a thing where this uberima fidei concept comes into play to very great extent. Now, when that happened, the Sri Lankan government had to face losses because the fuel prices came down, right? So they said differently argued at different courts. Now, certain cases were held in the Singapore arbitries, and certain cases were taken up in the London arbitry before the arbitry tribunals. So it was differently discussed. I'm not going to talk about that in general, but I just took that as an example for you. So due diligence is something that you have to always keep in mind when you are talking of good governance. Your part, you have to definitely do your homework and understand what you are going to do, what you are going to sign up, right? And especially in a situation like hedging, since you have more knowledge and you have more expertise in a hedging fund, you have an obligation to educate the other party as well about the consequences. You take an insurance contract, it's called uberima fidei in practice. So both sides need to disclose all what they know about that contract to the other party. right? Now, for instance, if you enter into a insurance contract without giving the, the true reasons or the updated information, then sometimes they can escape liability by saying you have failed to meet the oberima fide conditions, and then you have not disclosed an important factor, right? Now, for instance, you take a life policy. So if a person is suffering with cancer, and if it's the life policy taken without disclosing that he is suffering from cancer, then probably the insurance company can dishonor or dispute the claim and say, no, we are not going to pay because you have not disclosed it. You knew that you are having this, but you have not disclosed. So that's uberima fide. Likewise, it works the other way around also. But in practice, people are not much aware even to get, because if you see the insurance certain policies, sometimes there are so many hidden conditions. Truly speaking, those also needs to be told, right? So that's a different matter. So the point here we are trying to learn is the importance of due diligence in doing business or doing any transaction, because that's going to be part of good governance. If you don't do that, the good governance can be affected. Right. So it's a roadmap for existing and potential investors in understanding whether a specific investment will meet their expectation, risk tolerance, and investment strategy. In a non-exhaustive list, due diligence would consist of an examination of blah blah, various things. So what does this say? So especially when you are involving in an investment, as banks, we get involved in investment as investors, or sometimes we get involved in investment where others make investments with you, right? So you need to understand the specific investment and to see whether this investment is going to make you expectations, or is it within the risk tolerance that you have, right? Now, there are lots of discussions going on saying, okay, we went and invested in this, that is wrong, and that has made that, these funds and on an unwanted risk. So it all depends on the risk appetite. Whether it's wanted or unwanted will be depend on the risk appetite of that organization, whether that organization authorized to do. Now, when the government is borrowing funds, there's a borrowing limit for the government. If that is not the case, the parliament and the cabinet should increase that. Now, recently you saw the government went and increased the borrowing limits in order to borrow more money. So, if it is the money is borrowed without increasing the limits, that's going to be ultra virus of the whoever who was involved in that borrowing, maybe the finance ministry or the finance secretary or whoever who was involved, it will be ultra virus because they have gone beyond their authority, because they have gone beyond the risk appetite. So likewise, even in a bank, when you are investing, say if you are investing in a, say now there was a period where most of the banks went and invested in the Greek bonds, right? So it was a heavy, very, very kind of a very risky investment, right? They were facing lots of financial turbulence, and that time they issued the bonds at a very high premium when people went and bought it, right? But it's a risky thing. So in if you go and invest in a situation like that, in a instrument like that, then you need to know whether it is within your given authority. Is it within our risk appetite? Right? If the risk appetite permits, yes, fine. If it's not permitting, then whether the managing director or the treasury head can go and do that investment. So these are the issues. So the compliance need to know these things. That's what I say. It's not only sending the STR and the financial the CTR and EFTR. It's not only that. When a circular is received, just to pass it down and say, please comply. No, compliance job is a very vast job. That's why I take that example. I always take that example. You need to be a consultant physician who needs to know what's happening in your bank across the entire business verticals, right? So that's why these are being taught. So when you are into investments or when you become a party to an investment, you need to know the fund, what is the investment, right? Or what is the contract that you're going to enter into. So is it right? Then you can seek the assistance and the support from the expert, right? If it's you can always consult the legal and ask whether are you okay with this? Are you okay with the conditions of this? Right? So these are going to be part of then the disclosed investment strategy. Or is it in line with our investment strategy? Right? What have been the historical returns? Assets under management, and what are the assets that's going to be managed under this? So likewise, few things. This is not a full list. That's why they say it's a non-exhaustive list. So there can be many more that you need to take it in. Now these are very high-level things. Even when you scale it down, even in the little thing that you do, you have to do that. Now take an example of where you are going to procure a system, to buy a system, right? So then somebody has to take the trouble to see whether we have that, our agreements done properly, our contracts are done properly, right? When you are buying a system, whether our basic controls are there into that, or are we just ignoring it and just buying the system? Now the procurement committee assessment, all that can happen, but still, if you don't bring various, the common controls within that. Example, you buy a system, if there are regulatory changes which would require a change in the system, generally we bring a clause into our agreement to say, if this change is to be done in the system is due to a regulatory requirement, that will be done on FOC basis, free of charge basis. So unless that condition has gone into the contract, the supplier can always say no. You have not entered into terms, because that type of thing, whether we are doing it, but it may not be directly coming under compliance, but it may be the responsibility of the legal. Now, this type of thing can be checked through the RCSA, the risk control self-assessment done by the risk department. Right? All these are connected. We are talking about good governance, right? Not only the compliance function, but the important thing is the compliance need to know that there's a part that the risk has to deliver. There's a part that the internal audit has to deliver. There's a part that the business has to deliver. There's a part that your legal department has to deliver. So all this needs to be known by compliance if you are to make sure that we carry out our compliance function, a robust compliance function, in order to take control of all happenings that are taking place in the bank, so that we will not face any undue risk. We will not have problems due to non-compliance. Right. So going further, audited financial statements of the fund or entity is regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, right? That list is the continuation of the list. I think I have given an assignment to one group to look into the SEC and the CSC regulation, and also to do a comparison, right? So why that was given, because there's no time in this classroom to do a lecture on the SEC regulation, but you need to know that. So that's why that group will explore into that and come and discuss their findings here, so the others will also benefit, right? Then the fund terms and details, especially when you are investing in a fund, what are the terms, right? Then regulatory registrations if necessary. If you have to do a registration with the regulator, whether done. Now the Greek bond issue, you should have taken the central bank approval, but I know it was not a very it was not a known thing at that moment. Most banks did not seek central bank approval, but later on when things were turning bad, the issue came up. Why the central bank approval was not taken? So you need to go into these things when you are doing that. Then the risk factor, the valuation, right? So the risk factors need to be understood. These are all due diligence. What are the risks that we are going to take by doing this? What are additional risks that will come up by taking this action or not taking that action, by your omissions and the commission, right? How are we going to mitigate those risks? So if you are going to face that risk, is it within our risk appetite? Is it within our accepted tolerance levels, right? Then taking a valuation, even you need to know what is this valuation, right? What does this valuation tell about you? You just go down to a level of obtaining a security. Security by when you are lending an immovable property. How many of us read the valuation? I can guarantee and tell you, even the credit officers don't read the valuation. They only look at the value given by the valuer, right? The valuation will give the for sale value and the market value. And of course, some good valuers also tell the method of valuation. Is it used by the market conditions, or is it on the contractor's basis when you are specially valuing the buildings and things like that, right? Then there's valuation, the machinery, whatever it is. We need to go through the full valuation report because the certain information given there may be very important, so that you would have missed certain points where very high level risk can arise. For an example, these are very, simple things, but it happens. The valuation is there. Okay, you go and you do a valuation and then issue the valuation report and tells, fine, there are squatters in this given plot of land. Squatters means unauthorized occupants. They are occupying part of the land. So the valuation is given subject to the, removal of those unauthorized occupants. Now there's a condition given in the valuation. So the valuer says this valuation given subject to this, but it is not mentioned very prominently. These things happen. So if you don't read this valuation, you will not know that you are going to take a mortgage of the property with some people. You can't mortgage the people to you, when you have to realize the property. If the loan is defaulted, right, when you go to realize it, you can't auction it, because then there will be stay orders coming in saying, no, we are occupying this property. There are a whole heap of issues that we have seen in the bank. That is because you have not done your due diligence properly, right? So compliance can't go and read this valuation report. This is not what I'm trying to say. But these are important things that if you want to have a good compliance within the bank, that the relevant parties do their part. Now, who should read the valuation? The party concerned. Maybe the credit officer. If it's something to do with the investment, then the people in the strategy department or who are into that investment, they need to go through this. So the compliance in their compliance checks need to check on these things to see whether these things are being done. You can get the support of the LRM function, loan review mechanism. You may not have to do it by yourself, but you need to know if it's this type of things. You take the very simple example that I took, whether the valuation reports are being duly read by the parties concerned, right? One way is you can go through the audit reports and see. One way you can look at the LRM findings, loan review mechanism findings, independently done outside the credit. So those things will tell this information. Then you need to pick them up and say there's a compliance risk here because they are not doing their job properly. So imagine the scope of the compliance is a very wide one, right? I'm not asking you to go through the valuation. You cannot do it. It's not possible. But you need to make sure that the people who are entrusted with that task is doing it. That is why you need to get the support. It's a collective function. Audit report, the risk reports, then various other ML points, then the external auditor reports, all that you need to take into your consideration and put into your database to see whether the bank business is run in a compliant manner, right? The results of the due diligence will help to determine the selection of an investment or indeed confirm whether a takeover might proceed. So this is basically mainly focused on an investment where you're going to take over a bank. Now these days the mergers have again come into play, right? Now some time back it was the government policy, it was the central bank policy to do mergers. It's a good thing in one way, right? But if you have to do that, there are lots of due diligence that you need to do. The compliance need to make sure that the due diligence is done properly. Otherwise, you might just go and invest on something or take over a company without knowing and understanding the risk of it. Example, if you go and buy another company or a bank, and if the KYC is very horrible there, then probably once you take over, it's going to be your baby, right? It's better to otherwise then you will have a certain legacy portfolios, legacy accounts where KYC is not available. Then the moment you take it, it's going to be your responsibility. At least good to know by doing due diligence whether the account that have been opened by this company or the bank that you are going to buy are in the good order. Have they done their homework? Have they done their KYC? Have they done their due diligence? Similarly, their loan portfolios. How good are they? How quality are they? What is the NPA ratio? And what are the problematic loans that we have? All that needs to be factored into when you are doing an investment and paying a price for that. So this is the good governance. This is how the compliance, audit, and the risk can support these things. Are you all clear up to this point? So there's one more slide. Part of due diligence process will be to review the senior management involved with a view of determining their fitness and propriety, and also to verify whether they possess appropriate skills, knowledge, and experience. Now, this talks about the fit and proper conditions of the senior management. Now, the compliance can't go and check the fit and proper. At least compliance can check to see whether the fit and proper clearance has been obtained by central bank when appointing those people to the senior management position. It's a requirement. It's a legal requirement. Before taking and appointing somebody in a KMP position, you need to send these details to bank supervision department. If it's a finance company, to the non-bank supervision department, and seek the approval of the head or the director bank supervision or the director non-bank supervision, clearing that person on a fit and proper concept, saying he is fit and proper to hold this position, right? So that is also part of due diligence. So there are lots of things that you need to do. Due diligence part you need to do to have a proper sound banking system well run within your organization, right? So any questions up to this point? I'm sure you should have questions. How you are connecting, and we are talking about lots of facts here. Are everybody crystal clear on this? Or are you not clear on it? No answer. Can somebody speak up? Are you all clear on this, or do you want any further clarity, further explanation, or to have further connectivity?
Excuse me, sir. Could you please kindly brief further on this slide number 18, the fund snapshots?
Yeah, slide number 18. Right. Now, now we are talking of the due diligence. So as an example, they have taken an investment in a fund. Is an example. It's not limited to that. That's why I say it's not an exhaustive list covering all the area. Just as an example, snapshot of the fund means if you are making, say, going and investing in a fund, right? Now there are various funds. Now in Sri Lanka we had a fund called NAMAL, National Asset Management Fund, where you go and invest in various making investments, and they do their further investment by utilizing your funds, right? If you happen to do that, then you need to know what is this investment, what is normal, and what type of portfolio they have, and what is the return they are giving, right? And what is the risk we are going to take, right? So that type of the picture of the the investment we are going to do. Taking that example, so the scenario where we went and invested in the Greek bond some time back, then you need to know snapshot of the investment or the fund is, what is the Greek bond, who is issuing this, which country does, of course is Greek, so Greece is issuing it. So what is the financial stability of that country, what is their sovereign rating, so are they good enough to make our investments pay them back? That's about the snapshot, is that the basic idea and understanding about the investment you are going to make. What is the background of it? Have I answered your question?
Yes,
Hello?
sir. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Right. Any others who have doubts? No, this is just an example, right? It's not only this. So it can be investments, it can be any other type of involvement, it can be a borrowing, it can be a kind of a lending, it can be a merger, it can be anything that falls within your strategic, the bank strategy and the business the schedule. It can be anything. Due diligence, we are explaining the due diligence that you need to look at. Now, taking a very simple case where you're going to buy a system from a supplier, you have to do due diligence. You need to know who the supplier is, what is his existence, how long has he been in business, what are the other companies or the bank to which they have supplied their product, software, how good are they in their after-sales service, do they have their Sri Lankan presence in providing service, depending on the system you are going to buy. What is the importance of that system to us? Is it a tier 1 system, tier 2 system, or a tier 3 system? Depending on the tier to which it's going to be attached, you need to have your support systems aligned to that. If it's a tier 1 system, the immediate action needs to be taken if the system goes down. It has to be handled immediately. So if it's a tier 1 system you are going to buy, you need to do a snapshot or look at it and to see whether this supplier is in a position to give us that tier 1 support which is required for a tier 1 system. Do they have their resources? Do they have the expertise? Or are they going to consult somebody else and give you that? Then, of course, you are not meeting your risk tolerance, the risk appetite. So that's due diligence. Am I clear? The class? Or at least
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, sir.
one who raised the question. Are you very clear on it now?
Yes, sir. Further, that I want to get some clarification about this PEP scenario on that PEP accounts.
Which scenario?
To us? That means
Sorry, I don't hear you well.
That political exposed persons accounts regarding the due diligence. So, is it possible me to ask you a question on that, sir?
Yeah. Anything is possible in this classroom, as long as it relates to the subject. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. What's your question again? Tell your name, please.
My name is Lalit Gunawardana.
Yes, Lalit. From which bank are you?
Ceylon Bank.
Right, Lalit. What's your question?
Actually, this is regarding the political exposed persons due diligence requirement on that.
Okay.
So for the controls on that, so if the PEP accounts were introduced as a new or any other investments, so that senior management approval has to be required. Am I correct, sir?
No, it has to be obtained by default for anything, irrespective of it. If you are opening an account for a PEP, and if you get to know or the customer has declared that he is a PEP, or you have sound reasons to believe that even if you are not declared he is a PEP, you need to refer it to your senior management and get the approval before opening that account. That's the general accepted banking practice, but it's not said, probably it's in your operational manual or it may be by way of another circular, but the standard banking practice is, if it is your opening an account for a PEP, you need to refer it to your senior management. So it depends on the bank to bank, maybe the head of operations, maybe, that will vary. But the fact is, the opening of an account for a PEP itself is creating a risk to the bank because it's a risky, by default, a high risk issue. Then that is why it is referred to the senior management. So the senior management, it shouldn't be a kind of a just a formal routine process like you are sending it something through the post office. When you send anything, they put their stamp in, right? It's not be a kind of a postmaster stamping kind of an exercise. Why it is referred to senior management? Senior management need to look at the probable risk, and then probably they will advise you what to do with it, right? So that is because you need to have some microscope view on it. You need to have scrutiny on it before taking that call only. Your internal controls will tell you that you have to refer it to the senior management, right? So when it is referred to the senior management should do their part of it, probably to advise you what to do. You need to put them by default on a high risk pedestal from an AML CFT perspective. That is one control you have to have, right? So there are like medium, high, and low risk customers are there. So any PEP opening an account will be by default put on the high risk pedestal. That's control number one. Then you have to keep, now high risk accounts are under more kind of a closer surveillance. You are monitoring this account, right? Because the risk is high. From a money laundering part, the risk is high because they can make, they are in a position, I don't say all will do that, but by virtue of their office, they can generate illegal money. So then that can in turn affect you because then you are going to be aiding and abetting it if you don't do your part. So you will also become a party to money laundering if you allow that customer to misuse your system. Then you will be targeted and rather convicted as a money launderer under Section 3, subsection B, 3(1)(b), right? So that is why it is marked there. So then you have to keep your close eye on it, the type of transaction that goes through, the level of transaction that goes through, the pattern of the transaction that goes through this account. Then you have to always match that with your KYC and the customer risk profile and see whether there's any unusual transaction taking place, which is applicable to all accounts. But the PEP accounts, it is more severe because the chances of that account being, or rather the PEP misusing your system is comparatively high, right? So then it has to be taken, and that type of more close scrutiny has to be taken on this account. And probably different banks are different. Then probably you have to inform the risk BIRMC, the type of the risk account that you have, any observations you have on those accounts, any unusual patterns in the transaction. So internally that will set you a platform to say how our PEP account needs to be done. Have I answered your question? What's your name? Sorry, I forget your name. The Celan
Lalit, yes. It's perfect,
Lalit?
sir. Thank you so much. Yes, perfect, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're welcome. Another example that comes to my mind when you're asking this, obtaining senior management approval. Now you're obtaining collecting a check to a savings account, right? Most of the banks say, okay, you need to get the manager's sanction to collect a check to a savings account. Can somebody tell me why this requirement is there? Why this requirement is there in the bank?
Because for the savings accounts, we are not taking introduction from the customer. So as for the bank bills of exchange act, that bank will be liable for conversion if it is deposited to different fee collected to the different party. If they have,
right. So
if they don't have better title on that.
Okay, right. So by taking the manager's sanction, how are you going to avoid it? May I know your name?
Lalit.
Again, Lalit. Yes. Lalit, can you tell me why, then how are you going to avoid that risk by getting the manager's signature? Your answer is right. You have answered it 90% right. I'm asking you now the question, how are you going to avoid that risk by obtaining the manager's signature for that collection?
So the management, of course, they are the experienced party that having a higher positions there. So they have to evaluate the customer's title before collecting the same to the particular person.
Yeah, right. I think your answer is right. So why it's being referred to the managers for his sanction is for the manager to take a call, because as explained by Lalit, you will be liable for the tort of conversion as per the section 82 of the Bill of Exchange Ordinance, where the protection has been provided to the collecting banker by section 82 against this tort of conversion. But you need to fulfill certain conditions to obtain that protection. Firstly, it has to be a cross-check. It has to be, you call it, it has to be in order on the face of it, right? It has to be collected on behalf of a customer of yours. Then it has to be collected in the ordinary course of business, right? And you should not know about any, defect in that check by at the time of obtaining it. So if you fulfill these conditions, then you are going to be protected against the conversion towards the true owner of that check, even if that check was not, it's not the person who brings it become the holder for value for it, right? So by taking it to the manager, you are taking an extra step, because the manager is supposed to be the experienced most and the knowledgeable most person, supposed to be. It may not be the case, but by putting him in that position, the bank expects more due diligence from him. So he needs to know what he is signing for and what is the risk the bank is going to take if it backfires. And as long as you collect it to the correct person's account, and if you are happy with it, then the risk of conversion, the risk of conversion is rather remote. So that is why it is being referred. So that's again a good example for due diligence that you need to take or rather put into practice when carrying on your business, right? So I think now you all should have a more kind of a better understanding about what this due diligence means and how that affects or how that helps or facilitates good governance within the organization, right? So any other questions? Right. So we will move on. Then the corporate governance training, right? Training program for corporate governance would cover the following. Key governance issues: managing conflicts, unitary board and the balance of power, stakeholder management, managing financial and non-financial risk, communication and narrative reporting, transparency and disclosure, right? Now, what do you understand by this? Now, corporate governance training. Training is an important aspect in governance and the compliance. So you need to make sure that you do training properly. Now, training on AML CFT directly comes and lands in your plate. That's your call for sure. You can always get the support from the training division, but conducting that training or ensuring that the training is provided becomes the responsibility of the compliance officer as per the section 14 of the FTRA, Financial Transaction Reporting Act. It very clearly states that the compliance officer need to make sure that there is sufficient awareness of the MLCFT requirement among all members of the bank, right? So that is one side. Besides that, which is a regulatory and a legal compulsion. Besides that, training aspect needs to be in the radar of compliance. How good are we doing? Now, when you take training, I would like to classify that training again into two main segments. Training of the KMPs and the board, and training of your staff. Even the board needs to be trained on the corporate governance. Now, there's a requirement where a new member appointed to the board, we conduct an induction session for them. Like when you recruit somebody to the bank, most banks have induction session, when somebody is from a, say, clerical grade promoted to the executive grade or the managerial position, there are inductions conducted in order to give them a flavor of as to what their new job role is, as to what their responsibilities are, as to what is expected by the bank from them, as to what they should deliver, to give them a the very clear understanding of as to what their job role, what the scope, what are the requirements, or what are their obligations, what are their deliverables. So likewise, giving an induction to the board members and the KMPs as to the requirement is one very good important aspect in training, right? So when you are talking about that corporate training provided to the board, the role and the composition of the board, balance and independent. Then the governance regulations tells how many directors that can be appointed to the bank, maximum and the minimum. And within that, what is the composition? How many executive directors should be there? How many non-executive directors should be? What's the ratio? Right? You can't have all executive directors, right? So there has to be a good mix of executive and non-executive. Obviously, having non-executive directors to have more, because you have to have the managing director at least who is an executive director, right? Then there are certain banks where the big banks, the chief operating officer, number 2, is also a director. Then he becomes a working director. So the male you need to have non-working directors, that means non-executive directors. And then you need to have independent directors, non-independent. Independent directors are appointed, are representing the key shareholdings of the bank. Non-independent directors or rather independent directors are not coming like that. They are being selected by or recommended by the nomination board, the subcommittee, and then recruited because of the expertise that they carry in them in order to get their services to the bank in different fields. Now, there are certain banks who have the very experienced auditors sitting in the board. So, their services are needed because probably they will go and head the audit committee. Chartered qualified, audit qualifications. Some director will definitely have to sit there to head the audit committee. Then you have to have certain risk professionals there in order to probably run the risk. Then the HR professionals. Then maybe the legal, the expertise. And they even some banks even go and recruit engineers who are knowledgeable in doing large projects, engineering side. Likewise, you can decide, taking the strategy, taking your business path, all that into consideration. You need to decide on the type of expertise that you need to be represented in your board of directors, right? So they will come with that expertise, but they probably will not know about this governance. They probably will not know about the board requirements. So you got to induct them and tell them. Now, say a technical person being recruited, or maybe some top-level marketeers recruited, who have represented and function as CEOs and the general managers of the multinational organization. Because you're also doing marketing. They are going to bring those flavors into the bank. Probably they may know their job, but they may not know about this good governance and the banking concepts and the principles. You need to give them a flavor of as to what it is. What is the type of business we do? What are the products we have? And what is meant by the compliance? What is meant by risk? What is meant by audit? So general induction is given, especially the money laundering, AML, CFT. What are the obligations? What are the risks that can arise? All this information needs to be given. So that's the training of the board. Right? Induction, by way of induction. Then training of the corporate management. Similarly, the corporate management will also have certain people who is a credit expert, probably not know much about the compliance requirements, probably not know much about the risk requirements, probably not know much about the audit requirements. May know, but then you need to give them that insight and do the training. So you need to make sure and work closely with the training division or the HR division to see whether the robustness of the training program, what is the coverage, what areas are we taking, so is that training enough, or whether the after training and proper assessments done. Now, these are mainly the HR function, training division function, but the importance of that towards good governance is said here. So therefore, there's a role for the compliance also to at least to inquire from them and ask whether it is being done this way. That's going to be good for your compliance risk metrics. Get a confirmation from them that these trainings were conducted, and you see that certain training areas have not happened, and your NPAs are rising. Of course, the risk will look at it more than compliance. The NPAs are rising, and the NPAs rise because the quality of the credit is very alarming. You are granting substandard credit, and the recovery rates are coming down. So therefore, credit training, it becomes a must. It's inevitable if that's the case. So whether we are providing the good training to them, do they understand the basic credit concept? All that is necessary if you are to ensure that there's good training. So the corporate governance trainings involves all that, but it mainly talks here about the board level training, where the role of executive and the role of the non-executive directors, right? Then the roles of the chairman and the CEO. What is the role of chairman? What is the role of CEO? Now, there was a time where both chairman and CEO was the same person. But with this BIS principle, the Basel recommendations, these two positions to segregate. No one person can sit and do both the functions because two different roles. If both functions are going to be handled by one person, there are definitely going to be conflict of interest, right? So the role of the chairman, the role of CEO, what is the role of the directors, what are their duties, what are their obligations, then the CSR, the corporate social responsibility, that's very, very important, right? We call it triple P, right? People, processes, and the planet under CSR. These three are being looked at, right? So we will discuss if necessary about this in detail if time permits, right? So CSR is mainly done as a marketing now. You do a CSR and you go and publish a report. You go put some, photograph in the newspapers, or you take it for your annual report. The understanding or the real concept of CSR or the requirement or the underlying requirement to have good CSR is definitely much more wider. So it needs to focus on your people, the processes, and the planet. Green concept. If this planet survive, then only all other things will be available, right? If there's damage done to the planet, the environment, then all other things will also die, right? So that is CSR. So you need to give a training on the CSR, what is required, and what is the corporate social responsibility of the bank. And the next book is talking about the board induction, training, effectiveness. We discussed the professional development. That's also important when people are promoted and escalated to take up higher positions. Are we professionally developing them? You need to bring more professionalism into the way the things are happening, way the things should happen. So the professional approach needs to be developed in the people whom you are promoting, right? So these are important things under the corporate governance training. Then after doing that, under the training, you need to do board performance evaluation. You have to evaluate the performance of the board. When you say you, I'm not asking the compliance to do it. That's a self-evaluation the board has to do. But it's a governance requirement. So probably the compliance officer or maybe through the board secretary, you need to put these things in order. So board has to make a self-evaluation, at least on an annual basis, to see how good they have performed. because each person needs to be evaluated. CEO's function needs to be evaluated. KMP's functions need to be evaluated in terms of benchmarking with the bank strategy, bank business plan. Are we doing it? Because the CEO is conducting the business based on the policies or the directions given by the board under the supervision of the board. Whether those requirements are being duly implemented is the main function of the CEO. And it's cascaded down. So different people in the KMP levels will have to take different responsibilities in conducting their business function, conducting their operations, and realizing the deliverables that they are supposed to bring. All that needs to be evaluated. So similarly, the board performance needs to be evaluated. Then the subcommittee performances risk committee will have to make a self-assessment to see whether they have done their part. Audit committee has to do that evaluation, self-evaluation. HRRC has to do their self-evaluation. Then the nomination committee has to do their self-evaluation. Probably all the other subcommittees, RPT has to do their self-evaluation. So that's part of training, right? Then the reporting, internal controls, and the risk management, right? How the internal controls are assessed, how this report goes up, how the risk management is looking at it. Then the corporate reporting, including governance reporting and the risk management. Now, all these things need to be reported. If you go through your annual report, then you will see that contains hell of a lot of information. In addition to the financial reporting is an essential and integral part of it. That's fine. But in addition to that, those are called the quantitative reporting. But there has to be a qualitative set of reports also that needs to go in the annual report. So that's called the corporate reporting. Consists of quantitative reporting as well as the qualitative reporting. So each subcommittee, you have to give your compliance report, how compliant the bank is, and what are the initiatives you have taken to do the business in a compliant manner, and what are the initiatives the risk has taken, what are the key initiatives you have taken to manage the risk, and how you are looking at it, and what are your observations. So similarly, the audit committee will have to give their insights into that. Then the CSR report, then the compliance report, the governance report, all that. Governance reports will specifically take the corporate governance and then say, okay, the composition of the board is complied or not. All this, if you take your annual report and go through, you will see these things. These are the things that you have to see. But I wonder whether how many of you all read the annual report. It has just become a fancy document. But it shouldn't be the case. It is the kind of the full health check that you are giving out like reports when you are being recruited, or when you are being recruited to the forces, or when you are going on some foreign assignment. Your full medical reports are given, and then there's a certification to say that he is in good physical and mental conditions to perform this duty. Likewise, it is a message that you are giving to the outside world as to what this company is, what our strategies, what is our corporate management, what's our human capital, how are we managing our risk, how are we doing our compliance, how are we doing our audit, what are our lines of defenses we have, right, and how do we have done our CSR. All this comes within the part of, and probably what is your strategy for the short, medium, and long-term strategy, and what are your products, what are the new technological enhancements that you have provided, all that, and also what are the drawbacks you have had, and what's the reason, and how we are going to overcome that. It's a full picture is covered through the annual report, right? So you have to, in the training, you need to see whether these things are also being done, because this is part of reporting. Then it comes under the corporate reporting, including governance reporting, risk management. Then the stakeholder management. How are we managing our stakeholders? And how many annual general meetings we have had, and how much dividends we have paid to our shareholders? And what do we do to our employees? How do you develop our human capital? That's to the employees. Then how are you paying your suppliers? Then how are you paying what's your duty towards the public, that's what's your green policy, and what type of CSR you do. All this is right, and whether you have your communication. The bank need to have a communication policy. The compliance need to look at it. The communication policy will tell who will communicate on behalf of the bank, especially sometimes this communication policy is sometimes attached to the BCP, BCM, but ideally it should be a separate policy where it tells how the bank will communicate with people, how the bank will communicate with staff, how the bank will communicate with the public, how the bank will communicate with the regulator, how the bank will communicate in a crisis situation when there's natural calamity, who is authorized to come and make statements. So all those things will need to go into the communication policy. Then the shareholder activism and engagement, how do you involve the shareholders into into the business, and what type of benefits you are giving, or what type of dividends you are paying, right? And how do you listen to their comments in the annual general meeting, or even otherwise if they have sent their comments, how have you responded, right? And what are your relations with your investors? All these are important things that need to be covered under the corporate governance training, right? Then the AGM and the annual report, I think we discussed in detail, and you need to have your AGM, then you need to give, issue the notice of convening notice before a particular time period. As per the Companies Act, I think the month notice need to be given. So like that, then you have to publish your annual report and put it out. Then the company secretary is responsible for governance to the chairman, advising and guiding the board. Now, mostly when you are handling the board matters, it's mainly done by, not by compliance, it is mainly done by the board secretary. Most of the banks have their own board secretary sitting as a KMP within the bank. So the compliance need to work closely with the board secretary in order to get the feedback as to how the compliance requirement with regard to the board, how you have conveyed them their responsibilities, the governance responsibilities, how you are dealing with the chairman, right? And how the functions of the subcommittees, have they had their regulatory meetings, and have they put their assessments? All that you will get to know by liaising with the board secretary. Right. Now, the risk management and the internal control. Now, we discuss about the compliance function and how different lines of defenses. Then we discuss in detail about audit function. Now we will talk about the risk management and the internal control. That's the another tagged or categorized as second line of defense. Right. Effective risk management requires frank and timely internal communication. Any questions up to that point? Any questions up to that point, please? All clear? Right. So the corporate governance and training, the risk management and the internal control. Effective risk management requires frank and timely internal communication within the bank about risk, both across the organization and through reporting to the board and the senior management. Right. Now, here, it's extremely important that you work very closely with the risk management or the CRO or the risk division in order to identify the probable risks the bank is faced with, and how good are we mitigating those risks, and whether those are happening within the risk tolerance approved by the board. Now that will be your main function to see. Now, how does the risk function work? Right? The risk function needs to look at all the risks faced by the bank, the type of risk the bank is going to come across in carrying out their duties, and whether the risk we are taking is going in line with our the risk appetite, right? All those things you have to look at. Now, the risk function is supervised by the board level through the board subcommittee called the Board Integrated Risk Management Committee. In terms, talking terms, we call it the BIRMC, Board Integrated Risk Management Committee. The important thing is a board subcommittee. So the board members are sitting there. Integrated risk, very important. Integrated risk. Now, risk can be taken in separation. There can be credit risk. What is credit risk? The risk of not recovering the money that you had advanced. That is credit risk. Operational risk. Risk that can occur or arise due to certain operational deficiency or the lapses in operation, which can happen due to, willful, say the operation, the control is probably there, procedure, everything is there, but the procedure is violated or breached, maybe due to ignorance, maybe due to certain willful act, maybe due to, certain fraudulent mind, right? Maybe due to overloading of work. It can be anything. These are called the, the operational deficiencies. Then there are process issues. The risk arises due to not having the process in right. There's no process, there's no procedure document, there's no procedure established. People do it the way that they like. So the risk can arise. Or the procedure is there, procedure is not good enough. Procedure is not robust enough. It's not comprehensive enough. It's just touching. That's not enough. You have to go more detailing. That's called the process issue or the process deficiency. So the risk operational risk can arise due to, I think these are things that you probably have to note, right? You have to definitely note them down if you really want to have a, good picture about it. So the operational risk can arise due to process issues or the operational issues or the operational deficiencies and the process deficiencies. Operational deficiencies, only what I said about ignorance, willful, overloading of work, right? That can happen due to many things. Less manpower, right? But the process deficiencies, then of course the process needs to be corrected or the process needs to be made more comprehensive. So that's the operational risk. So different risks are there. Then there's credit risk we touch, operational risk we touch. Then there's exchange rate risk. Then there's the interest rate risk, right? Then there's your compliance risk. Then there's compliance risk is legal and reputation risk, right? Then you have the foreign exchange risk. There are so many risks within the bank. Everything you take, there's a risk. The integrated risk management is taking all this risk into consideration. What is the impact on the bank? That's called the integrated risk management. You are integrating all this. An operational risk can go and lead to a credit risk, right? It can happen. If the operation is not done properly, if the credit operation is not done properly, that will obviously can go and lead towards a credit risk. An operational risk can go and lead towards a exchange rate risk, right? Because the proper operation is not conducted. So these are interconnected. If you make if there are unwanted interest rate risk you are taking, it might go and have a impact on your profitability. The liquidity risk, right? Then the solvency risk. There are so many risks, right? So each one risk can have an impact on the other, or multiple risks can have an impact on the other. Or when one risk occurs, it can lead to various other issues. So likewise, you need to take all these risks together, integrate them, and to see whether how that's going to affect the bank. So that's it. Then the under risk management, the BIRMC shall ensure that the risk management division, the BIRMC will work closely with the CRO or the RMD, risk management division, right? So the BIRMC will look at whether the risk management or the RMD is assessing on a monthly basis or a periodical basis all relevant risks faced by the bank. As I mentioned, it can be credit, operation, in the market, can be financial risk, can be liquidity risk, it can be solvency risk, right? Whether they are monitoring these things, identifying, monitoring, and assessing them through appropriate risk indicators. And also by using various management information, the BRMC will look at it, right? Then again, they will look at and review the adequacy and the effectiveness of the risk management level. How effectively and, comprehensively they have this risk management techniques and the tools with due focus on certain specific risks that are creating very high degree of risk to the bank or to the finance company, using various quantitative and qualitative risk methodologies and the risk limits. Now, that's very important in the risk function. So when I say all these things, you see a very broad picture that is covered by the risk. Not only that, then after seeing these things, the BIRMC shall recommend and review prompt corrective action for the risks that are being reported if they are not addressed. Ideally, when these things are addressed, the risk division, I think I mentioned this, they have the risk function is independent, compliance function is independent. Their reporting lines are to the board direct or to the board subcommittee. But doesn't mean that they are going to keep the management blind on their finding, unless it's a fraud or something. So they have to discuss these things internally. The forum is the Executive Risk Management Committee, which is an important element in the risk function, which is ideally headed by the CEO of the company. He has to sit and chair that meeting because it's so important, where the RMD will liaise with various other verticals, the operations, the compliance, audit, and through their own activities, they will identify the risk and bring them to table to discuss and highlight the risk by referring it to the respective the appropriate parties concerned, so that they will be aware of it, and by proposing the risk mitigations, and then to see how best those risks can be mitigated, right? So the board the BIRMC would recommend and review prompt corrective action to those highlights or the finding, right? Then they will ensure or rather drive the RMD to come up with a document called where the prudent levels will be determined and accepted and established as to the levels, we call it the risk appetite statement. Because I think I mentioned this at the beginning, when you are doing your business of banking or the financial business, the non-bank, everything you do, there's a risk. I mean, you cannot do any business without taking risk, but the risk needs to be identified, assessed, measured, then mitigated, then reviewed to see whether those risk mitigations are taking place, and then the reporting will come as part and parcel of it so that everybody will be aware. So in this process, the BIRMC would ensure that the bank has identified the risk levels that they are willing to absorb, willing to take, which is called the risk appetite. And those levels need to be very prudently established. How much of risk we are going to take, right? And such statement we call the risk appetite. Once it is established and recommended by the BIRMC, it has to be approved by the board, right? Like any other company policy or the bank policy, it has to be approved by the board, and thereafter the risk will have to keep on identifying and measuring, benchmarking with this risk appetite document to see whether the risk we are taking, when we say we, the bank, the risk the bank or the financial institution taking is in line with the risk appetite statement. Or are there any deviations? If there are deviations, of course, then it's a serious matter, right? Then either you need to go back to your drawing board to see whether your risk tolerance levels are proper or it needs to be varied or changed. Then it has to be done, then reviewed by BRMC, then again approved by the board, right? But the risk division has a role to play to make sure that the risk appetite or the risk appetite document is well within our operation, or any operations are going beyond the risk appetite. So that's something else the board will also look at. Then the BRMC would take action against officers who are responsible for the breaches and violations and the regulation and the laid down procedures, right? When they say they are going to take action, they are not going to punish them. They will direct the management to take action against them. When you say action, it can be providing them more awareness, issuing them warnings, then probably taking more other serious disciplinary action. But depending on it, the board would want to know through the BIRMC what action is being taken against these violators or the breaches, right? Then similarly, they will see what findings are there made by the outside parties, like the bank supervision or the non-bank supervision, which comes by way of the supervisory concerns from the regulator. Then other regulators like SEC, they also come and sometimes carry out their, the various checks and issue reports. FIU does that. FIU carries out their compliance checks and then issue report. And the external auditors, I told you, they issue a report that's called the management letter. Then the board will look at those also to see the status of the bank in terms of the highlighted issues. Have they been rectified? Or are we on schedule towards rectification? Or have we fallen short of the agreed deadline or the given deadline? All those things will again comes under the scrutiny on the microscope of the BIRMC. Then the BIRMC, in turn, will ensure that there's a strong compliance function. Strong compliance function within the bank. That's a very important thing. Because you remember the methodology that we discussed. You have risk, you have audit, you have compliance. So it's important that the BIRMC looks at whether it's a strong, robust, effective compliance function within the bank. Who would assess? Because it's the requirement of the compliance. The bank's compliance with the laws, compliance with the regulation, and compliance with the directions, rules, regulatory requirements, and also the internal controls, and also the approved policies. This is the compliance function. I think we discussed this in detail. So in order to do that, they would rely upon the compliance officer, a dedicated senior management level officer or a corporate management level officer. When you say senior management, they're only referring to corporate management in practical sense. Officer is appointed as the compliance officer who can sit on par with the other KMPs, who can drive the compliance function through his knowledge, expertise, and the level of seniority, right? So having a dedicated compliance function is appointed is also the responsibility of the BIRMC. And the BIRMC, after doing all this, they will bring the important points to the notice of the board, the main board, where the BIRMC members are also part of the board. So they will brief the board on their findings, their observations, then the various risks that come up, various corrective action, all material information will be presented to the board of directors by the BIRMC chair. Of course, if necessary, they will get the other KMPs, compliance officer, the risk officer, audit officer, also summoned before the board, probably go and explain. So that is how this system works, the governance system works. Through them, the board gets to know all important areas coming under their purview, which needs to be looked at under risk committee, the audit committee, then the HRRC and the nomination committee and various other board level subcommittees, so that the top board is always appraised of what's going on underneath at the operational level, and they are made aware of all those findings from time to time, right? So that is the function of the risk committee and the risk department. And also, as I mentioned, this committee is authorized to seek any information, right, which is deemed as necessary by them from any employee of the organization. They have the right to call for any information. They have the right to call for any document. So that is given as a mandate and authority to do, and they can source relevant information by calling them, and then for their purpose of their review, purpose of their assessment, purpose of their monitoring, in order to see whether we are on the right footing as far as the risks are concerned. The committee, the BIRMC, with the approval of the board, can even seek advice from many outside parties, like expert advice. Maybe from certain, experts like, the TechCert, the system vulnerability assessments through various expert agencies outside. Then probably, if necessary, they can seek special legal advice from eminent lawyers to what to do. So this risk committee is authorized to seek that type of expert advice from outside parties, subject to the board approval. So that's basically the mandate of the risk committee, and that's the risk committee function. So I will detail about the risk function a little bit. I think we can take a break now. Any questions up to this? Any questions up to this? Right? So I'm giving this information as additional information, but which are very, very relevant to the subject area that you need to be covered. Right? So you need to know the 3 lines of defenses under the governance, mainly controls, risk, compliance, audit, and their contribution towards good governance. So we have covered audit. We have covered the compliance function in our first module mainly, right? And now we are touching on the risk function as well, right? So these are going to be important. And I once again emphasize, you take your notes down, take your points recorded, and clarify your points if you have any doubt. So we will take a break now. Any questions once again? How many are on screen now?
Hello, sir. Just
35, 36. Yeah. Go ahead.
one question, sir. Regarding that, you said the CEO and managing director should be 2 separate positions
No.
instead of.
I never said it. I never said it. What's your name?
Angelo, sir.
Which bank are you from? Angelo?
From HSBC. So that one you said that should be separated. The 2 positions should be separate, sir. If you
What
said
I
as
meant is, I don't know whether I have slipped my tongue, but the point I was trying to drive is chairman and CEO needs to be separated, not chairman,
right, sir.
not
That's right.
CEO and MD. No, I didn't say that. If I have said it, it's wrong. I did
No, sir.
mean to say
You
that.
mentioned correctly, sir.
I said
CEO and
chairman and CEO. Yeah,
CEO.
they
Oh,
need to
yes.
be segregated because they are two different functions which there can be conflict of interest because the chairman is the head of the board. He is there to set policies. He is there to set the framework. He is there to show the direction where that the board wants that business or the bank to be run. The MDCO is while sitting as a director, he is part of the management. He is a working director, right? So when this position is going to be held by, that is the MD, managing director, and the chairman position or the CEO position going to be held by one person, that's conflict of interest. Because one side they are setting the policies, they are showing the direction, they are telling this is the way to run the business, right? Then on the other hand, they are the people who are supposed to implement those implementation, putting it operationalized, putting it into practice, putting it workable. That's the MD CEO's function, taking the direction from the board. Okay. Therefore, the chairman and the CEO or the managing director shouldn't be position shouldn't be held by one person. That's the segregation. But CEO and the managing director is generally held by one person because chief executive officer is the person who executes the business operation, and he has to sit in the board because then only he becomes part of the board also. So I told you, in big banks, CEO and even the COO, right, are directors, but they are executive directors. The advantage of they being sitting in the board is that they also become part and parcel of the supervisory function, right? But by being the chairman, who is the leader of the board, who is the topmost person in the board, who directs the board, trying to do both these functions, then there's conflict. You understand? Did you get it?
Yes, sir. Thanks, sir. Yes.
Other students? Okay. Right. Any other questions? No. Right. So we'll break now. So we have covered everything up to now. And okay. I thought I'll give you some more because it was conducted by one or two participants over last weekend. Any special areas you want me to touch in this area, the subject matter that we discussed? Any specific area? Yeah, we have basically, covered most of our content part of it. But if you want, I can elaborate on certain other things like, going into the BIS recommendations and the basic rules and things like that. But mostly the practical side we have covered. But how those this governance requirements have evolved, I can touch on that subject also if necessary. Right. Okay. Any specific areas or questions you need to clarify now up to this point? No. All clear. How many are here now? About 35? $32. Yes, about 35 are there. Right. So what I will do is I will touch a little on the BIS principles. So that basically that is how the corporate governance was evolved. Or else I can do this now. We discussed about the risk part of it now, the BIRMC part. So can I touch you on the RMD functions? What are the areas that you need to touch? Which area you think for your examination purposes? I think we have covered enough now based on the syllabus content that's given, and we have to take our assignments thereafter. But you need to be given more time, no? Now it's about 2 weeks now. We are given the assignment. Now you are already given 2 weeks time for the assignments, correct?
Correct, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right. So by next week you have to submit your the executive summary and the synopsis, and by the 4th week, in another week, 2 weeks time, you have to be ready with your stuff. Right. So having that in mind, I will brief you a little on the practical side of risk. Now, all this time we discussed the risk contribution and the BIRMC function towards the risk, right? Then the RMD function towards the risk. That part I will touch on it a little bit. And if you are doing of the BIS principles, I will get another tute done for you all, and we can discuss that probably next week on the BIS principles, or if time is left, we can touch on those also today. Just to talk about the risk function, now risk division within the bank, the BIRMC function. So BIRMC is depending on the risk division to support them in identifying, assessing, evaluating, and then probably submitting their recommendations as to how those risks can be monitored, right? So based on that, the risk division would focus on different risks the bank is facing or the finance company is facing. So as I mentioned earlier, one of those important, most or widely experienced risks comes in connection with the credit risk, right? So under credit risk, you need to ensure that the appropriate credit risk strategies are developed and implemented and monitored. When you say the credit risk strategies, how the credit risk can be monitored, right? So you can use the risk appetite statement for that, where the credit risk can be segmented into, or rather the angles of looking at the credit risk. You can say, what are the type of products that we are offering to the market? So then you can have your limits on different products. Now, say housing loan is a product. So what is the maximum exposure we go up to housing loan, right? In the entire sector, housing loan sector. Then what is the maximum exposure we can leave on the say onto the agriculture sector? What is the maximum exposure we have even within the agri sector? What is the maximum exposure to which we would expose ourselves or grant loan under T, right? Then what is the maximum exposure where we would go and lend for manufacturing industries? Then what is the maximum exposure we are trying to take in the field of tourism? Likewise, you can have your risk appetite statement going into more detail so that you will set your benchmarks, you will set your risk appetite, saying that the bank will stop at that point. What is the exposure we are going to get again? One single borrower exposure. What is the maximum exposure we are taking on a group? That is the group exposure, right? So you have to set your parameters to say, when it comes to say pawning, what is the exposure we are going to take on a pawning advance granted against a 22 carat sovereign? What is the maximum exposure you will take against granting a facility, pawning advance or a gold loan, two different things, as against a 18 carat gold, right? So what is the margin that you would keep when granting gold loans? What is the safety margin you are keeping? If it's gold loans, you have different tenors: 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, right? So 1 month product, what is the safety margin we are keeping? 3 months product, what is the safety margin we are keeping? Like that, you can have your various parameters set in the risk appetite. So I'm talking about the how to monitor the credit risk, right? Then in the risk appetite statement, what is our liquidity levels, right? There are regulatory liquidity levels you have to keep, regulatory capital adequacy levels you have to keep, right? Then regulatory SRR you have to keep. So what is the limit that we keep as a buffer? What risk are we taking? Now SRR is 4%. Sometimes the bank might have, say, we are going to keep 4.5% as our benchmark rate. And what is the NPL we are going to have as our risk appetite? If anything goes beyond that, that means it should trigger you an alarm, right? So likewise, you will have your credit risk monitored in such a way that you would have appropriate credit risk strategies developed and put them into practice and then monitor through that. Then again, you will have your risk policies and the framework. Periodically, the number one is to have them established and then to have them periodically reviewed and monitored. Because no policy is carved in a stone. Policy needs to change based on the landscape changes that are taking place in the industry, in the regulatory system, in the market, you may have to change your policy. So how frequently you review your policy, right? Then how you are going to take the corrective action, and how good are you in your corrective action? How effective are you in your corrective action? How do you monitor the improvement? Do you review them? So basically, I'm just giving you a kind of a nutshell. In a nutshell, what should be monitored under credit risk? Then the operational risk. These are the two main risks that's faced by a bank or mainly a financial institution, right? So you have to have a mechanism of identifying what are the operational risks faced by the company. Then you need to review those operational risks and to identify the operational losses, right? Operational losses. What losses have the bank incurred in terms of operational risk? And also, you have to look at the near misses, not only the actual happenings, but the near misses. You know the difference between an actual happening and a near miss, right? So these are the Basel requirements. You have to provide sufficient capital for the operational losses. If you have a little bit of idea about the ICAP, right? Integrated capital assessment. So various capital components need to be kept against different risks we are going to take, right? So you have to, operational risk also you have to set aside a certain amount of capital in order to meet those, because finally it's a buffer, right? So you are safeguarding the customer deposits. So then the capital will come on, because that's the first one when it's eroding into the bank's, the assets and the reserves. Before touching the customer deposits, right, which is an obligation on the part of the bank to repay, it has to go and penetrate through your capital. So you need to keep your capital, adequate capital to meet various risks. So the operational risk also, there's a component of capital that you have to set aside. So in order to identify this, you need to quantify the operational risk by going into the historical data where your company or the bank has made different losses over the last couple of years, and keep use them as historical data in determining as to how much of capital you have to set aside to meet the probable or the possible operational losses that can trigger, right? Then probably you have to, and also the near misses, I touched on the near miss, right? Near misses, it has actually not happened. It was about to happen and it was somehow stopped. So likewise, the near misses also needs to be captured in the operational risk dashboard, and add a certain premium onto that when you are deciding on the capital to be kept, right? Frauds, all those are operational losses, right? And the near misses, the fraud may have happened if it was not detected at the last minute. So it's a near miss. Now, for instance, a forged draft being presented, right? So when a forged draft is presented, it's general practice that one bank experiences that, then they inform through the SLBA to the other banks, there's a draft like this, which the fraudsters are presenting, which is fraud to you, so you got to be careful. So then this message is sent around through the SLBA to the other bank. Suppose after receiving this and they are alerted and this draft comes to another bank and they detect it. Because of the information that they had received well beforehand, then probably they don't issue, but it's a near miss. It's a near miss, right? So an attempt was taken to rob the bank or to take cash at gunpoint, but your security system really did work. So there was no loss. but it needs to be captured as a near miss. So that's the difference between near miss and an actual loss. So the near misses also needs to be captured for very many reasons. One is to keep your allocate a certain amount of capital as probable losses, which could arise through that near miss, and also to identify them and strengthen your internal controls so that you can avoid that as well. So that's why the near misses are also captured. Then you need to have a very robust business continuity plan, BCM, business continuity plan. So BCP is falling within that business continuity planning, rather the bigger picture is the business continuity management, BCM. Within BCM, you have the BCP, business continuity planning, which includes various drills, including fire drills and various other computer drills, to see how best you can continue your business. These are all falling under the operational risk, right? So the risk division would drive, or rather be in the forefront in driving the risk function by carrying on the BCM, or rather driving the BCM or initiating the BCM to be put into practice. So that's another thing that would come under the operational risk. And therefore, continuous drills, continuous reviews needs to be carried out, and there's a requirement for once you do that, a full DR drill, disaster recovery drill, which is falling within the BCM. That is where you imagine or visualize a situation where your main computer system fails, right? If the main system fails, how prepared are you in shifting your system to the DR drill, or rather to the DR server, and carrying on business without any interruption? So this, you have to carry out various drills, involving all the systems operated in the bank to see if all these fail, how good are you in resuming or continuing your business operation by using the disaster recovery or the site. Main site, you have the operational site, the main server, and you need to have a disaster, another server to be used in a kind of a disaster, right? So the BCP, when you are testing, you have to test this. So risk division needs to take a very leading role in that and driving the IT function to carry out those drills. And the risk division has to issue a report on that. And that has to be regularly, it has to be sent to central bank on an annual basis. After carrying it out, what are the observation and what kind of comforts are there in carrying on business using the DR site, right? So there are so many other things that involve the size of the DR site, the capacity, and how effectively the switching on is taking place. That is for the drill. But then if something really happens, say for instance, like, if some natural disaster or some, Boards Act, the building goes under fire or building goes under floods, or there's some earthquake or something, so the main server is damaged, or there's some, due to high power, anything can happen. The site may fail. So if that's the case, how fast or how continuously you can shift to your DR site, DR server, and carry on your business. So lots of technical things are there. The risk has to be in the driving seat. So these are basically having the risk functions to have good governance, continuity of business, so that you are providing necessary support to your customers to carry on their business without any interruption, right? Then again, to take the necessary corrective action on those identified areas or the shortcomings, shortfalls, right? That's under operation. Then you have your, technological and the system risk. That's very important these days, right? A lot depends on your system, and you are working from home. That's a new new risk that has come up, right? That has arisen because most of your staff are working from home and they are using your systems, the bank system, to work from home. So how good are we in our security features when the systems, the access has been extended to work from home, either by using certain designated devices, and also by if the devices to be used are not the designated ones, what controls do we have in order to stop leakage or our data going out, valuable data being put out or getting exposed? Then you need to check your internally the vulnerability assessments on your internal and external systems, right? Vulnerability assessment on the external vulnerability assessment, internal vulnerability assessment. So how good our systems are, so that it would prevent any cyber attack or anybody trying to break into our systems by using technology, right? How sound are our servers? Those are coming under the external vulnerability assessment. The routers through our payment, switches. How prepared and how ready are we to face that type of issues? Then under systems, okay, you have to monitor your system downtime. How many times your systems have failed? What is the frequency? How long it has failed? Your ATM, other servicing machines, the system, your electronic banking platforms. What are the downtimes, and where did that happen? Is it due to what reason? Is it due to current failure, the national grid electrical supply failure? If that's the case, how good your generators are taking on the system? All these things need to be looked at, right? Then, as I mentioned, the network security vulnerability and the ransomware readiness, because there are regulations to check your ransomware readiness. These days, it's happening very frequently. It happens. You see, that site has been attacked. This site has been attacked. They have, walked into somebody else's, and as a result, the files have all been corrupted, and they can't restore those data. So that you see this type of various cyber issues, right? So you need to carry out. When I say you, I'm referring to the risk, right? Risk in liaison with IT, or probably getting certain external advice. Need to make sure that you review your risk assessment and the network security vulnerabilities, both internal and external, and also covering the ransomware readiness. And then identify the issues, and if there are issues, then again to categorize them as high risk issues, medium risk issues, and the low risk issues, and give priority to the high risk issues and try and fix them as quickly as possible. Then data leakages, right? So you have to have various devices like the DLP mechanism, right, to address the critical points where the data leakages can take place. And then to have, various mitigating controls within it in order to make sure that our data and the information is very well secured, management information and the customer information, right? Then probably you have to look at your liquidity position. How liquid are we, right? So you have to therefore review your liquidity on a periodic basis in order to ascertain the ability of the bank to fund its operation without any interruption, and to see how best we can face the distress that is experienced in the market today in terms of liquidity, in terms of your foreign exchange, right? In terms of, various other disciplines. How good are you in facing those challenging situations which you find in the market? I think it's a known fact today that every bank is faced with, not only the bank, the country, there's a heavy scarcity in the foreign exchange, right? When the country is faced in that scarcity of foreign exchange, the level of degree to which that affects each individual bank depends on their capacity of the holding capacity of the foreign exchange in order to meet their commitments. I know there are some banks who are unable to retire the bills that are generated through the LCs opened by them. Right? The customers are bringing, when the bill is to be matured, customers are bringing their money in LKR, rupee terms, and paying the bank to convert them into dollars or whatever the designated currency of that bill and to settle it. But due to this foreign exchange issue, there are certain banks who are waiting for certain inflows to have dollars or any other currency, especially the US dollar, which is the hard currency, the mostly utilized currency in Sri Lanka for foreign trade, till you receive them in order to convert these rupees paid by your customer to retire the bill by settling it in terms of US dollars. So these are the foreign exchange risks. So whatever it is, our point is, this type of different risk situations arise and come up in the market due to various changes taking place politically, economically, socially, right? And global issues. Things can happen. But how good are we in taking those shocks and having our buffers and absorbers so that your business will not affect, which can in turn have an impact on the customer whom you are serving, and ultimately can lead towards customer dissatisfaction and losing the confidence of the customer towards the bank and the whole system, the banking system. That's dangerous. That is why all these things are being looked at as part of governance, as part of control. That is why the BIS principles have been set by, defining various responsibilities and establishing the importance of, having this integrated approach in carrying on your business in such a way that all these risks are duly monitored, taken care of, assessed, quantified, measured, and prioritized in terms of the degree of the risk, and then probably bring the risk mitigating controls into play so that you would avoid the final impact on the bank due to arising of that risk. Right? Then probably, I think, comes the liquidity risk. I think we were talking about it, right? How your liquid positions to ascertain and see whether you have the sufficient liquidity to carry out your business. And therefore, you need to review your liquid asset ratios from time to time and ensure maintaining them minimum at the regulatory levels prescribed by the regulator or the central bank. You need to measure that and see whether you are meeting the regulatory requirement, probably keeping a little more cushion and a buffer onto it as your risk appetite, so that you will always be cushioned in meeting the regulatory requirement. Then probably you have to carry on various stress testing. These are certain risk tools. You stress different situations at different levels to see what if this risk goes up by 5%, or if our liquidity levels come down by 5%, where are we going to be? If our liquidity levels stress by 10%, how comfortable are we in meeting our other obligations, right? So different things, you have to do the stress testing and see. I'm talking of the risk function, right? So you are basically trying, by doing all this, to avoid any surprises, to avoid any unexpected situations coming up, and as if they're falling from the sky all of a sudden. No, that has to be stopped. You need to have your prudential regulations, the prudential controls, so that this type of surprises are avoided at any cost. So for that. Then you have to benchmark, or rather compare that with your business strategy. Integrated risk, that's what I say, you have to integrate this. Now, no point in just looking at only the liquidity risk without having an understanding about your lending. You may be comfortable today, but your business plan goes simultaneously, and it is wanting to increase your loan book by 10% in the next month or in the next quarter. Are we ready with our liquidity to meet that integrated risk? That's the importance of that. Without rather looking at different risk in silos or separately, you need to put them together and see what is the ultimate impact on the bank by having this here at this point, which can go and trigger something else in another point, right? So that's the integrated risk management. That is why the compliance function, or when you talk about the good governance or the corporate governance, has insisted that independent risk function is important, that an independent audit function is important, that an independent compliance function is important, which are treated as the second and the third lines of defense. Needless to mention about the first line of defense, which happens at the operational level, where each business line needs to carry on their business operations in such a way that you are doing your business in accordance with the internal rules and regulations, which is supported with maybe dual control, various other requirements. That's the first line of defense. Second line of defense is risk and compliance. That's the textbook, what the textbook says. I personally have a different view, that whether the compliance should be brought into the third line of defense. That's my personal view. It has not been established and proved. But whatever it is, no matter whether second or third, it's a line of defense. You got to go through and break through this in order to have an impact on the company, right? So that is why it's important to learn these things. You cannot do compliance in isolation by only getting into a silo of compliance. No. Compliance will happen with all these things happening around you. So you have to make sure that these things do happen. That is why you need to understand this, the DNA and the chemistry of the banking operation, and how these things are connected and knitted together. Right? Then you have to have your reportings proper to the board, to the executive risk committee, then to the board, to the RMC or the BAC, and then probably to the board, depending on the nature. So this basically I touch upon on the key aspects of the risk function. And now you understand how the risk function is important to have good governance within a bank? Now, technically, you are supposed to know by now how the compliance function is supporting or involved in determining having good governance within the bank, how the audit function is involved or contributing towards the good governance of the bank, and how the risk function is contributing towards the good governance of the bank. Right? So this is important for them to know. If there's a question on this, you have to explain it by taking point from what we have discussed and enrich your answer with points. Depending on the time allocation, there's a 35 minutes time allocated for one question. Probably first 5 minutes you will read and jot down how you are going to frame your answer. So it's an area or a question where you can, write a thesis, write a 10,000 word article. But if this is the question or this is the type of a question, I'm just preparing you for the examination, thereby preparing you to take up this requirement in a practical situation when you get back to your workstations in doing your compliance within the bank. Understanding the macro level requirements that are considered as part and parcel and integral part of the function, which ensures good compliance, good governance, well-run good governance within your organization. So the compliance needs to know the internal chemistry of this. They cannot work in isolation, I am repeating. They cannot work in a silo, I am repeating. They need to have, that's what we learned in our first module, the skills and the competencies and the capacity the compliance officer should have in liaising with all these things. If you go back to your drawing board, you will see the compliance officer needs to be a senior officer who sits on par with the other corporate management people. No, if that's not the case, if he's not that senior, if he's not that recognized in the organization, if he or she doesn't have the overall knowledge, the macro view of what's happening in the bank, will this be possible? Can this be done? This integration part that we have learned in the theory now, or learning in our theory part. You should be able to connect these things into your practical situation to see what are we learning in the classroom and how important these things are in our day-to-day carrying out our compliance function. This is the importance of these sessions and the topics that we are learning in this program. Because the idea is to put out a good quality product as a diploma holder in compliance to the market. But I can vouch and tell you, the quality or the content part you are getting in this program is really good. Whether you are getting it in the true sense, in a way that you are going to apply it in your day-to-day functions in compliance is the question. If you do it, that definitely you are putting out a very good quality product to the market who can very well support the compliance function in your own bank and the organization. So what is required is probably from your side to pass your examination, but the inner objective of this, in addition to giving that recognized qualification, to put out quality products to the market so that the compliance function will be done in a much more meaningful way. So the organization will benefit, the particular staff member will benefit, and the organization will benefit. As a result, the industry will benefit. As a result, the economy will benefit. As a result, the country will benefit. These are all interconnected. With the primary benefit the compliance officer or the person who follows this course is deriving. See, the importance of that and how that's connected and gets, escalated up to the country level, where the entire system is going to benefit from this. Now, I hope you are now in a position to collate and relate and connect all your learnings which you have got from this course up to now into your day-to-day operations in carrying out your compliance. So may I now request you to ask any questions or clarifications that you need on this point up to now, where you are already being provided your handouts, and much were discussed on the risk function, which is not mentioned in the handout because the risk function was coming under another lecturer's purview. So I didn't want to touch on it. Some of the things that I have mentioned may have duplicated with what you have already learned, but I presented it as a value addition for you to understand it better in the, connecting it to your routine, day-to-day functions, the operational level. Right? So therefore, the points which I discussed after the break, probably you don't get these things in your tune, but treat them as value additions. Probably I guess and I presume there's a separate section to talk about the risk part separately, which came under another different lecturer in the same program, and you are already given certain amount of information and insights into it, and this can be treated as supplementary and complementary. If you have made your notes, that's good enough, coupling with what you have learned in the under another module conducted by another lecturer. And from this point onwards, I will touch a little on the BIS principles, the good governance and the background to the BIS principles, on which probably I may give you a tune next time. So until then, you can listen to it. Keep your notes done so that you can connect it to the handout you are going to get probably over the week. Right? Once we finish that, we are completing our, actually speaking, my normal subject content, I think I have more or less finished, but I thought it's best to give you more insights into this BIS principles as well. So which I would touch upon from now, and probably we may take on this and next week we'll be finishing our lectures, and after that, depending on your the course content or rather the assignments given, we will take up your assignments once your 1 month period is over. Right? So today is the 6th or the 7th day. How many sessions we have had so far? Maybe the sixth or seventh session we had today, right? Anyway, go back and check on it. Any doubts that you want me to clear up from what you learned up to now? Anything from anywhere, even from the first module or this one, what we did now or last week?
I have a small clarification to get from you.
Yeah.
Especially in non-banking institutions, we see sometimes both risk and compliance are done by same department or same set of people. Will there be any conflict of interest in doing that, or what is your suggestion in that regard?
Randilu, can I request you to repeat your question? There are heavy rains here. I didn't receive you properly.
Okay, so can you hear me first?
I do hear, but only thing I missed few part because it's heavily
So,
raining here. Yeah.
okay, in case of especially the non-banking companies,
Okay.
there are some companies who use risk and compliance both same set of people or same department.
Yeah.
Will there be any conflict of interest, or probably what do you think in that scenario? Is it like acceptable or how?
Yeah. It's like this. If you go by the international standards and the international best practices, these two should not be handled by one person or one unit. There has to be, because you remember, we discussed about 3 lines of defenses very importantly, in addition to the first line of defense, which is the operational level. Okay. So you have to have these 3 functions independently functioning as per the international best practices, the Basel and the BIS principles as well. Okay. So the only problem is the banking sector, the regulation is very clear and they want this fully run independently. But the non-bank supervision, my understanding is, subject to correction, they are now insisting on it, but I know certain finance companies have not bifurcated these 2 functions. It's still being done. Even in banks, some time back, both these functions were done by one unit, one person. So there was the corporate management officer, AGM, risk and compliance in many banks. But as way back in 2010-11, they have been insisting and they had to bifurcate it, right? So sometimes what happened is there's a compliance officer, the risk officer are reporting to one particular senior DGM or somebody. Even that bifurcation was done. So the compliance officer was made a senior person sitting probably in line with the corporate management. The risk officer is sitting in line with the corporate management, and this went bifurcated. So the best way to do the ideal situation is to bifurcate and have 2 different functions, 2 different independent functions, I would say, and reporting to board. Risk will report to the board chair of the board risk committee, the RMC. Compliance will also report generally to the chair of the board risk committee. So 2 independent functions. But the non-banks, it has not happened in full. Some have done, because I know certain places they have insisted through their examinations, reports, and the supervisory concerns. I really don't know whether there's a direction that they have issued to bifurcate this, but I know for sure that they are also wanting it to be separated. So maybe due to the level of operations, due to the lack of resources, certain companies may have still been given a certain amount of leeway for this to be run by one person. But the ideal and the best industry best practice or international best practice is to have them separated around the loop.
Thank you so much, sir.
Right. Any other question? You are from a non-bank, right, Randilu?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Which company do you represent?
From asset line leasing.
Asset line. So is it done by the same person there?
Actually, sir, the risk is right now taken care of by a group function where we have
Yeah.
a champion in house. So that's what
Okay.
kind of to
So
check.
then there's a certain amount of bifurcation done.
Yes.
Right. So that's good. And if not, so I think you need to be prepared, because in time to come, they will insist on it. So without waiting for any surprises and sudden thing to fall, better to get prepared for that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Right. Any others?
Sir, a small question on KYC reviews.
Yeah.
like a common problem which we have encountered is now we send so many requests and letters to the customers requesting for their latest KYCs, but
Yes.
like a very handful of responses are received.
Okay.
So, can you just shed some light on it? Now we have a regulated requirement as compliance officers, but then
Yeah.
collecting the information is a very hard task actually.
All right. Right. You are Sandani.
Yes, I'm Sandani.
From which bank, Sandani?
I'm from Asset Line Capital.
All right. Okay. It's like this, Sandani. Now, get to the fundamental. You have any question? My approach is get to your basics, right? So when you get your basics, what does the basic say? You have to have this information, right? So then the problem, when you dissect the problem, before these requirements came into force or rather being made compulsory, probably you may have had a set of customers who can be tagged or identified as legacy. You had them prior, right? Then you have a certain amount of comfort, but at some time back, saying that okay, these were the customers whom we had, and that was not the requirement at that time. So therefore, we need more time to get at this information. You could have had some comfort if it's a legacy customer, set of customers who belong to your previous, onboarded segment of customers prior to this requirements came into effect. But if the particular set of customers whom you are referring to, but still I will touch on it separately. But if the segment of customers whom you are referring to belong to the customers who have been onboarded after these regulations were imposed, then the situation is very, very tricky, right? So you have to look at it two different ways. If that's the case, then there had been definitely a lapse on the part of the company in collecting this required minimum information without before such customers been onboarded. So the risk is very high because the regulatory breach is much more evident on the face of it that there have been a complete regulatory lapse on the part of the company or the bank in getting the KYC. Then you are on a very, very slippery and a bad wicket, right? So now you understand the two levels of risk, but still even the legacy is not an excuse, but you can always put forward this and say, they were there, and then we have been taking action, we have been writing to them, we have been following up. You need to have records. Now, AML, right? You need to have, I always say there are 4 golden steps in covering the AML risk or mitigating the AML risk. Identification, monitoring, reporting, and record keeping and reporting. That's how I analyze it. So this falls under record keeping. This particular section that I am referring to falls under record keeping in my way of analysis. Identification, monitoring, record keeping, and reporting. So whatever you do, you need to keep records. Now, suppose if it's a legacy set of customers, you need to keep your records to say that this is the day that we wrote to them first. This is the day that we wrote to them a reminder. This is the day that we send them the second reminder. Probably this is the day that we followed up by verbal intimation. You need to have some records to tell your regulator that you have taken all possible avenues and paths and action under the sun to get this information, but still they have not reported. Then there's some more work to happen. Then you need to probably analyze these customers to see if the KYC is not there. If I were you, I would put them on high risk pedestal by default, right? Because you are having these accounts in your organization, in your customer profile or the customer base without having the required information. So that means a fundamental issue from a AML CFT point of view, and then you can be charged for negligence, for deviating from the regulatory requirement, and there can be a penalty on you. When I say you, personally on you, if you are the compliance officer, and it can be on the organization. Corporate fine and the various other consequences and embarrassments can happen, right? Then at least if you keep your records, you are mitigating it to some extent by, making the regulator feel that they have taken all the precaution, all action possible to get it. If all that fails, put them on the high risk pedestal and monitor them very, seriously, right? You have to monitor their transaction in terms of its value and in terms of its pattern of transactions, comparing that with whatever you know about that customer. But still, if you don't have information, there's not much of information available with you to profile the customer. But you have, due to the fact that in the absence of it, you have put them on the high risk pedestal, they are high risk customers, and then you can take your action based on your internal call. Either you can ask the customer, here, we have written to you on such and such a date, this, and that you have failed to do this, right? Please call over in office to take call, right? Or else, if the transactions are so big and very important to the bank or your company, you will make your assessment about it. It depends. There's no hard and fast rule to say how you are going to do it. If he's such a big customer doing such a large operation, probably you can use your websites, you can use the customer websites, you can browse them through to know who this customer is all about. Then you can personally visit the customer depending on it, and then try and get it. But if the numbers are so big, and if it's not the case, then you will probably do a risk analysis to prioritize the risk in having these customers, right? What are the accounts that carry or reflect high level of transactions? You can group them. The customers who don't have KYC or who are not given KYC, who have failed to give KYC but doing their operations over 100,000 a month, you can put them on different baskets. Risk approach, right? Now the technical term is risk-based approach. Who are the customers who do transactions above 500,000 a month average? Who are the customers who don't have KYC but carrying on business operations over and above 1 million, right? Then anything above 2 million, 2.5 million, like that, you can segregate them. You can categorize them to see. Then you can put them on different risk metrics to see, from a risk point of view, who is the riskier most customer to us, because in terms of the value of the transaction, and in terms of the pattern of the transaction. You can use if you have a AML expert software, you can identify the customers where the transactions happens. You put, if it's a good system, it will tell you. When you pick and choose a customer, you go into transactions, to put it, it will give you a tree of transactions. Where did this money come from? And thereafter, where did this money go? Is it going to his own account, or is it going to some other's account? Or is it going outside the jurisdiction, or is it going to another bank within the country? So you will get all this information if you have a proper MI system and a good expert AML software. Then that will give you more insights as to the risk that can arise from this particular transaction or this particular account relationship, right? Then there's a lot of homework that you need to do. Okay. If still then you see that there are lots of transactions happening and it's being sent from one account to another, transaction coming back, you might see V transactions, you can see U transactions getting extended up to the outside jurisdiction, you can see U transaction within the country, you can see U transactions within your own bank, within the customer's same account. Then that puts you on inquiry to find out then you can talk to the customer and ask what these transactions are, right? So there are lots of homework that you need to do. And after doing that, that's monitoring, identification, monitoring. This applies to everything. Even if you have KYC, still you will identify, you will monitor, right? Then if it is very suspicious, I would recommend you immediately raise a STR and tell the central bank, FIU, that you have a customer like this, and this is the type of transaction that you see, and then that arouse your curiosity, because repeatedly you are saying that he's not cooperating and giving the information. Therefore, I raise my STR. Remember, you are fully covered. If you have taken the decision in good faith and without negligence and acted as an ordinary person, right? How your behavior is in line with the behavior of an ordinary person, then you are covered. You are telling the FIU, I have a suspicion on this customer, right? So then if that's the case, Sandani, am I talking to Sandani? You are the person who raised the question, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. So then you have to do a lot of homework, Sandani. You have to dissect this so-called customer base into different platforms to see what is the risk that you are raising. And finally, you need to take a call, probably by discussing with your seniors, asking this customer to close the account by giving sufficient notice. And still, even if you close, sometimes you might have to raise STR. It depends, because there's no hard and fast rule to say what you can do, right? So just to sum up what I said, if that's the case, if it's a legacy customer, then you have a little more comfort by explaining, by doing your follow-up action properly and explaining it to the regulator. These are legacy. That's why we have not taken, or this time is the required are there, but still these are the actions that we have taken, but still we have failed, right? If it's not legacy, the new customers whom you have missed it, then of course the risk is extremely high. You can be charged, you can be levied a penalty for doing that, and there's so many Sri Lankan banks have been slapped with fines due to not having their KYC properly, even in Sri Lanka, and it's very common, especially in India. This has happened, and there are so many the banks in India, including very reputed banks, who were slapped with fines for not having KYC. And even internationally, you have instances where very heavy penalties have been levied for not having due KYC. So it's a very risky situation, right? So you got to play by the ear, sticking to the basics and the fundamentals. Playing by ear is not enough alone. You need to stick to your basics and the fundamentals and do your homework, profile them, identify the risk, put it on a risk pedestal, using the risk-based approach, then handle them, step by step. That's how you have to deal with it. And worst case scenario, you may have to tell the customer to close the account. And still sometimes, even if you close and asking to close also, you might have to raise STR. So it's a call by yourself. I cannot give a direct answer as to what you should do, but I think I have given you a background, the way that you should handle it. So depending on the situation, you need to blend these actions and then take your corrective action accordingly. Have I answered you, Sandali?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Others, all crystal clear? No practical questions or scenarios even for you to have more clarity? I'm sure you should have questions to clarify.
Hi, sir. Just one practical, since you asked a practical scenario, so one
You can ask
case.
anything for your
Sure.
entire class, my student. You can ask me anything related to compliance. That's no problem. I'll try my level best to do my justice to the questions you raised.
Sir, just regarding the practical scenario, like Wirecard, sir, that there was a company called Wirecard, they had a scandal and they had played out. So in that case, sir, the three lines of defense was there, but it didn't. That means be able to prevent the fraud. So in any from that kind of scenario, so like what is the alternative? Like we see there are three lines of defense within that. Of course, was I think a credit card payment company providing services, but so there are also the like the audit, external audit failed to uncover the fraud. Then the internal, that the two lines of defense also had issues. So like an issue, something like that's like what is your like view on that kind of issue?
Okay, right. May I know
Yes.
who's speaking?
Angelo, sir. This is from
Angelo
HSBC.
from
Yes,
from
HSBC.
HSBC.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Angelo, now you don't mind giving me the methodology that they have used, or little briefing about this incident that you are saying? Because I'm not very sure of exactly what you are referring to.
So they are like an intermediary for like card payments. So
Okay.
Wirecard had been banking services. Now normally we use this clearing. So like Master Visa
Okay.
cards. Wirecard
Right.
also was a company like that to do the clearing payments. But what had happened is internally they were supposed to maintain some balances. So the balances that were supposed to be in the books weren't there. So that means that had been played out or something like that. In between there was a fraud. So the external audit also was conducted, sir, but then they were unable to uncover that. They didn't question, like there were certain things like normally when they come and audit a bank, we know you check your if you check an Ostro account, you check your balance, so you check the balance confirmation. So that kind of thing checks didn't happen, sir.
Okay.
So that in that case, the third line also failed. That's all the three lines of defense failed in that specific. That was a one in only one scenario. Like you can get, sir, but so like in case like that, what is the other alternative? Like if we say, because if we, three lines of defense anyway is the main way of preventing fraud or
Yeah.
any corruption happening in the company. So in case of a thing like that, so like what is your view on that? Like this,
Okay, it's like
yeah,
this.
sir.
Thanks for that question.
Sure, sir.
Anyway, I'm still not very clear on the basically the methodology that have been used by these fraudsters, because what I understood from you is did that happen with a reputed service provider, or are the merchant? You mean the like Mastercard, Visa, or is it kind of some intermediary who sits in between, who probably linked to the main franchise holder with the bank? Is it something that you are saying, or is it did this happen with a particular a card service provider, like the Master, Visa, or MX, or whatever it is?
Yeah, so they go as the payment processor and financial services provider in Germany,
All right.
based in, yes,
All right.
Germany. So
So,
that
right. So you
is
are
yes,
basically saying an intermediary who probably through somebody's gateway the payments were channeled. Is that right?
yes, yes, sir.
Right. Right. Okay. So I think it's much more clearer now. So basically, then whatever it is, stick to the basics, stick to the fundamental. That's how you need to analyze any question. However much the complex the situation is, however complex the scenario is, the best way, in my view, is get to your basics and the fundamentals. What is the basic? You, in carrying on your business, need to ensure that your systems are not being misused by the fraudsters, gangsters, money launderers, terrorist financiers, so on and so forth. If you do that, you become party to aiding and abetting money laundering and terrorist finance. The law is that. So the basic is clear now, right? All our efforts in having our KYC, risk profiling, having the minimum, sticking to the FIU, the regulators' minimum rules and regulations, right? In order to make sure that your systems are not being misused by your customers or by any other intermediary service providers to carry on their evil action or the undesired activities or unruly activities by misusing your system. If that happens, you will become party to money laundering or the terrorist financing by way of aiding and abetting. Right. This is the scenario now. So the 3 lines of defense that we talked about is risk compliance audit. That's the international standard in order to safeguard you from the probable risk or the, that could arise in the process of carrying on your business. Just because that all 3 lines fail to detect doesn't give you any immunity from this risk, because it's the internal call or the defense line. It's like you talk about these lines of defenses, you take it the war kind of an environment. You have a first line of defense, you have second line of defense, you have third line of defense, but the enemy penetrates through all 3 lines of defenses and then come and attack your target. Their target, that's you, right? So you can't say that because all our 3 lines of defenses fail, that's why we were attacked. So therefore, we should have freedom. No, it's not going to be that, right? If for whatever the reason, if your 3 lines of defenses have failed, that means it's your problem. When I say your, it is that entity or the bank's issue, because your 3 lines of defenses they have been able to penetrate through the 3 lines of defenses, and they have done their undesired activity or the evil activity or the unruly activity or unlawful activity. So as a result, you become a victim, either by way of a direct victim or you become part and parcel of that situation or the series of happenings, and you are becoming aiding and abetting money laundering or to some fraud. When you talk about the money laundering or terrorist financing, especially the money laundering, there are predicate offenses, several predicate offenses, violation of which would tantamount to a predicate offense that would tantamount to money laundering. So similarly, terrorist financing also, you do it and they use your system to finance terrorism by way of using clean legal money as well as using illegal black money. Still, you would be aiding and abetting terrorist finance. So through this system, fraud is a predicate offense. Committing fraud is a predicate offense under various things. It can be by way of bribery. It can be by way of the violation of the drug ordinance, the dangerous weapons ordinance, human trafficking. Then there are various. It doesn't come to my mind. So would I learn under AML? There are so many predicates of it, right? So any breaches, and then finally it says any offense, any criminal offense that could be fined with death or rigorous imprisonment for a period exceeding 7 years would also tantamount to predicate offense under money laundering, right? So therefore, fraud becomes party to or a material kind of a incident which can constitute a predicate offense. So maybe that as a result, you are probably maybe aiding and abetting money laundering. So if that happens due to your failure to detect through your internal mechanisms or the control system that you had, will not give you any immunity unless you are covered through some kind of insurance, right? Now fraud, you have insurance. That's a different way of passing your risk, right? I'm not talking the regulatory side of it. If it's only a financial loss, by having the sufficient insurance, and if you can prove to the insurance company the service provider, that you have taken all your precautions to do, but it happened. Then we have that policy called the employee indemnity policy. So if any fraud take place, you can take cover under that and ask the insurance company to remedy, or rather make good the loss that you made due to an internal fraud. Of course, you have to provide that thing. But if you have any kind of transferring risk mechanism like that, having yourself insured through an insurer, through this any fraud that's taking place through this payment gateway and the payment channel, then you'll be covered. But if it leads to a situation where the regulator is coming and saying you have failed in your duty, as a result, there's a money laundering or a terrorist financing offense has been committed, and you have aided and abetted through your negligence or omission or by your commission on your part, then you will be liable for that, right? So my answer, taking the general picture into it without having exact information as to this particular case which you are referring to, is I'm not privy to have that information because I don't know on what ground you are referring. But in general terms, your three system failing will not give you an immunity if it's a money laundering or a terrorist financing issue, right? But if it's anything fraud or that has taken place, which does not tantamount to money laundering or terrorist financing or any other regulatory breach, probably you might get cover if you are duly insured. So that's my general answer that I can give you, Angelo, to questions you raised. I don't know whether I have given a sufficient coverage to the question you raised.
Sufficient, sir. Thank you, sir. Anyway.
Right. So anyway,
Yes.
if you have any doubt, you can give me more information, then I should be able to answer, because without knowing the ground level happenings, I can't give a direct answer to it, but I just try to give my comments on a general perspective as to what it would be. Because if a payment channel intermediary has done a fraud and your systems have not been able to detect it, it's your problem. It's your problem. You need to have fraud detection mechanism, fraud detection, the software, fraud detection control, fraud detection reviews, in order to prevent these things happening. So that's the requirement. That's why you say you have more sophisticated products, more sophisticated payment channels, more sophisticated methodology in transferring your payments. Then the risk of that product is high. So you got to have equivalent level of risk mitigating infrastructure to control it. Right? If you are into using and open your gateways to your customers to do through your system to do fund transfers, to send, and of course the nostro accounts are not not to be given access by to the customers, is to be used by you only, right? So these are the basic controls. So if we are still within it, then it has to be covered by the should be ideally covered by the insurance. If not, the bankers indemnity policy will cover that type of thing, if that's the case. Otherwise, you have to take the hit if that happens. So in this particular scenario, what happened? Was it a kind of a regulatory issue, or was it only a financial loss?
So in this case, financial loss as well. Then the auditor, like the external auditor, also has failed to uncover that kind of that fraud that happened, because this is, I think, relating to accounting frauds. So internally they have falsified the accounting records in the company. So the external auditor also has failed to detect this abnormality, because they didn't go into the in-depth checking. So normally if you say a balance, we say, okay, right, we get the other bank's confirmation that such a balance is there. That kind of checking, sir, didn't happen also. So
Basically, Angelo, it tells a story where your basics have been neglected. Because if you have anything like that, the basic requirement or the fundamental requirement is to do your reconciliation. If the reconciliations were done properly, this would have been earth or rather surface. Okay, so if the reconciliation had not been done, it's a fundamental error, a control lapse on the part of the company, right? So you don't have to escalate it to the auditor level. If this is exactly what has happened, and if the reconciliations were done, and if there have been fraud, of course the reconciliation would detect it. A proper reconciliation would detect with your whatever the home mirror account you have, when you reconcile with the other whatever the intermediary, or I don't know how that operation is. Say, so just for understanding, just take the nostro, right? So the nostro and then your account here, the vostro, there has to be reconciliation. It is the mirror image taking place now, right? So if it is any intermediary who is sitting in between as routed this transaction, probably you will have either an account or some kind of a mirror account type of a creation in the accounting system to know exactly what their balance is, and then you would reconcile with whatever you have done, whatever they have sent in between, what and what things are pending, so which can lead towards the difference in the, of course these two accounts will not tally. The reconciliation will only help you to tally and to make sure that the transactions have actually taken place properly. So if it has not had happened, that means the fundamental basic level, the primary the control also had failed, right? Then it comes to the next level. The internal audit had failed because they also have probably either not done it due to that particular area did not come in their audit program for the year. It depends, right? Then the external auditors, I mean, when they do, they also given an audit engagement. So I don't know how well this particular area was it within their purview of the audit, or it was out of their purview of the audit. And when they do it, still they do use the sample check method, right? So that depends on the audit engagement you have had. So sometimes they do it on a sample check method. Sometimes the audit engagements are given to ransack the whole thing, starting from the last audit to this. They have to check everything. So it depends on how the engagement is done, how we have rather assigned it, and how they have responded to your letter of engagement, right? So all these things will come into play. Then your internally fraud detection systems are there generally, right? If how that this is not captured, or is it due to a kind of a miss, or is it due to not having that particular scenario built into it, because these are rule-based systems we have. So it could be anything. So you have to do a little bit of more deep diving to understand exactly what really went wrong, where this could have been detected. But fundamentally, from what you say, I guess it's a mere proper reconciliation would have, surfaced this right at the beginning or within reasonable time. Generally, the reconciliations are done every fortnightly or minimum on a monthly basis, right? So if it have done in the proper sequence or at the frequencies, probably the loss would have been much more lesser. So various fallback options now. Then whether it has not been duly covered through insurance, that is transferring of the risk, right? Then again you have to look at and to revamp, or rather to reassess your insurance policies and the areas to be covered under insurance, right? So there are a lot of homework to do if this has happened, and then only you can sort of take it forward to avoid further losses or further occurrences of such happening. Okay, Angelo.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for the detailed explanation on that.
Welcome. Any others? Right. Okay. Then in the during the next week, I will make arrangements to give you a little handout on the BIS principles. Now that I said I will touch on it, I'll give that handout, and we will touch on that. And with that, we will be finishing our lectures. and thereafter it's time for you to focus on your assignment. Take it very seriously and try to do a very comprehensive job, which is definitely going to enhance your knowledge on it, which in turn will help or facilitate enhancing the knowledge of the rest of the group. So likewise, if everybody does the engage in the topic given to them, you have 10 different areas which are very, very important to the compliance function, and the knowledge you are going to gather is enormous. So once again, my request for you all you have 10 people there. So then 10 heads are put together, then definitely it should throw out a much better product. But if there are any passengers who are not contributing, you got to tell me right at the beginning that these are the members who really contributed, and these are the members who didn't contribute. So that question I'm going to ask from each one of you. If none of them, anybody not cooperating, right? The group can decide and either tell at the beginning that these parties have not contributed. So when I'm awarding marks, I will take a note of it very seriously in avoiding, because this is, you are getting 30 marks out of the allocation of questions you are going to answer, and then it's that. And also, if time permit, but in this time the group presentations would take at least 3 days. So with that, our general the time allocation is still going to exceed. But if you are still interested, we may discuss a question or two, right? You need to tell me the question beforehand, not for any other reason. When a question is raised, I want you all to study the question and come. Then only you will read. Because before discussing, I would want your answer to the question. Then I will give, add my comments, which will make it a more comprehensive answer if you all have not adequately covered. Then only it's going to be a meaningful exercise. Otherwise, just giving a question and asking me to give it, it's going to be another lecture, right? So if a question is to be raised, send those questions. You can liaise with IBSF and tell them we want this. We may discuss maximum 2 questions, although maximum 2 to 3 the most, right? Send your questions so we can decide on it. But you need to come prepared to answer the question. Then only you know where you fell short, right? That can be done provided we have time. So how are you all? How ready are you with your assignments now? By now 2 weeks gone means you have to by now have done half the stuff. How many group 1? Anybody here from group 1? No?
Yes, sir, we are here.
Yeah. How have you progressed, Johan?
Yes, sir, we are halfway completed. Now, still we are finding more information.
Yeah, good. Right. Okay. Group 2?
Yeah, that we also done the half, and we had to prepare the synopsis and the PPT at the moment.
Yeah. So your final report should not be less than 2000. That's the minimum. That's the minimum, because certain topics I found, okay, when you are writing a report, the number of words can be 2-5, but many topics, except for 1 or 2, can definitely write much lengthier. Means it's not the length of the answer that's going to matter a lot, but it's the content. So there's lots of content that you can touch, which will make the final product 5,000, 6,000 words in general. So having that is fine, but I just said 2,500 to 4,500. Having the, in excess of 4,500 is also entertained, but stick to the other things, presentation time and all. So you might be given 20 to 25 or maximum 30 minutes, 25 minutes, let's say, for presentation, and another 30 to 35 minutes. So within, we should be able to finish up one question by discussing and then adding my comments. So that's the process. Then group 3.
Sir, we also have partially completed, sir, and right now we are searching for further information, sir.
Right. So you all are on it, right? The ball
Yeah,
is rolling.
sure,
Group 4. Group 4.
So we have segregated different areas among the members, and somewhere mid of this week we have to compile everything.
Yeah. So look at and then try to give a comprehensive, coverage to the topic, right? Okay. Group 5. Group 5. Nobody. Group 6. Group 6.
So we have also gone up to half of our process. The report has been done by the group members. We have to amalgamate all the details and make the report and exit summary also.
Yeah, I'll just remind you of a probable or a possible pitfall when it's being done by several parties and connecting it together. You have to look at the flow. You need to see how good you can connect them as it is, right? So these are the general the problems that arise when several people write different reports and trying to put them together. So that's good, it's fine, but you have to see when you are putting it together how well it is syncing together, synchronized, and how the connectivity, how the flow, and probably different the language styles. All these things need to be standardized. So it's good, I'm just telling you, right? As a precautionary measure, so that you will be very much focused on this when it's being presented. So it's good. Then that's group 6, no?
Yes, sir. It's group 6.
Right. Group 7.
Thank you, sir.
Group 7. Group 7. Nobody? And group 8? Group 8? Not a soul? Group 9?
Yes, sir. We have drafted the report and collecting information from the each member, and this is a new experience because we can't meet each other and collecting as by using Zoom experience. And one more thing, sir, we want to clarify that do we have to produce this PowerPoint presentation also on third deadline?
No, not on third. On the third, the first deadline which comes on the third week, you need to give your synopsis or the executive summary.
Right.
Right. The PowerPoint and the final report can be produced on the fourth week, end of the fourth week, and thereafter I will announce when we are going to take the presentation.
Okay,
Each,
sir.
whether it's the synopsis or the PowerPoint or the report, I need the cover page attached with your group name, title of the topic or the topic, and the participants with their photograph.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Name, you can put the photograph, not a very fancy one, right?
Right.
It depends, you can decide, right? So
Right.
just to identify the person when they are making the presentation, I will want you to switch on your camera,
Right.
right? So with that, you have to give your name, the you mean the photograph, your name, and the institution that you represent.
Okay.
In all 3 cover pages, that information needs to come.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. So that's group 9, right?
Group 9. Yes, sir.
Right. Then the group 10.
Sir, Mano here. We
Yes.
also in the stage of collecting information.
Yeah.
Then that what we are doing is we ask people to our members to provide their some draft document where they are very comfortable, and after that we are planning to have a discussion maybe during this early this week, and
Yeah.
then try to finalize the document synopsis.
Okay. Right. Good. So I'm okay with the all 10 group except for 5, 7, and 8. Once again, anybody from group 5? Anybody from group 7? And anybody from group 8? So it's a little disappointing that we have nobody representing 5, 7, and 8 here. So if you all have any friends and the known parties in this group, please do communicate, convey it to them that they need to work on it and not to take it too easy. It's a very time-consuming function. So you need to start on it. Maybe that they have started and unfortunately maybe that they are not here today, present today, whatever it is. It's important for them to know this. I will liaise with the IBSL also to get connected to these 5, 7, and 8 groups. So other groups are good. They are on the game and they are holding the ball. So make sure that you
Hi,
promote
hello, sir.
Yes.
Sorry to disturb you, sir. This is Group 7. So we
Yes.
are we are also already in the process. We are on collecting informations,
Yeah.
and we are about the SEC and CEC project.
Yeah.
So we are
Yeah.
on the collecting information progress, sir.
Yeah. You're Aishwarya.
Yes, sir. This is Aishwarya.
Yeah. Thanks, Aishwarya, for your representation of the group. And your topic is very straightforward one. So try to be very comprehensive, covering every area in this. Because now you see, now that we discuss our, governance, you see how important it is to know all this information by every compliance personnel, right? So put it in a very because and the framework is very clear, and the content part is very clear, right?
Yes, sir.
So you need to give a very comprehensive document covering all this in
Yes,
this
sure.
SCP and CC. Okay, thanks
Thank
for
you,
that.
thank you, sir. Thank you.
Right. Then group 5 and 8, anybody representing? Last call. Okay. They are not there, so I'll do the needful with IBSL on them. So I'm happy that all other 8 groups are rolling the ball and they are at it. So it's good. So hope to come back, and next week you will get another tune. And what we discussed today, much beyond the note given to you, mainly on the risk part of it. So because I did not give a note on it because it's a party. Can I get a feedback from you? There was a risk area that was covered by another lecturer in the same this program, no? Am I right?
Yes, sir. Sure. Yes, correct.
Right. So I hope he has adequately touched on it and you all have got it. So what I mentioned would have been certain duplications. If not, it's those are additions and which is complementary and supplementary to it. So having that knowledge is also important. Just because you don't have a note doesn't mean that you will not have a question on it. Okay. And even the exercises you are carrying on, there can be connected questions on some of those also, right? So it's part of learning. It's part of the program, right? So take it seriously and listen to the other group presentations also, right? So there can be a question, on those. So that's my message to all, to take it seriously, and also to be present when these are presented, right? So if you have doubt, you yourself can raise questions like I am asking from the other group who is presenting, right? And finally, again, want to remind, let's not allow passengers to ride on somebody else's shoulder in this exercise. If they are not adequately supporting, contributing, you yourself may have to tell me when the presentations are done, who are the parties who are really at it and who are the parties who are not at it. So that's fair enough, no? Right. So having said that, we will wind up for today and probably meet up next week, and we'll be finishing our lectures. And thereafter, if any further time, anyway, you will be given 1 month time to make the final presentations, no? So by that time, you can have, and once it's finished, I think you are still given further 2 weeks time before your examination. Study leave given by the IBSL. So, and whether to have the examination, it is still a question depending on the country situation due to this COVID. They have to get approval from the health authorities, the municipality, and all that to have the examination. But be ready. If situation turn normal, probably you will have your examination 2 weeks after the lectures are over. So that's the norm. So be ready for that. So then anything extra you are getting will be additional time for you to prepare. Right. Okay, then. Thank you very much. So we'll meet up next week.